Chapter 376. Arrival. I'll just give it to you for free. Heath was too lazy to care about a few high-level magic stones. After all, with his current income, these magic stones were really nothing. He then took out 3 high-level magic stones and threw them into the basket. Thank you. Ha ha ha, magic stones, delicious magic stones, high-level magic stones. I like the taste. I love the taste. The bamboo basket's eyes lit up instantly, like 2 torches lit up in the dark night. It stared unblinkingly at the high-grade magic stones that had fallen into the basket. As it praised, it opened its mouth, it stretched out its long tongue, and rolled the magic stones into its mouth. Ka! 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 A few crisp sounds rang out from the basket's mouth. These magic stones that were as sturdy as gemstones were actually bitten into pieces by the basket. Burp. The basket finally opened its mouth and burped. A ball of elements came out from its mouth at the same time. It looked like it was enjoying it very much. It clicked its tongue and said, "I love this smell." Then, its attitude towards Heath became much better. It said enthusiastically, "Thank you for your magic stones, young man. You are much better than those misers. You are on a whole different level. Those people look like they are putting on an act. When it was their turn to dig out magic stones, they would cry about being poor and haggle with me. It's just a few magic stones, yet you want to lower the price? It's really too detestable." After venting his dissatisfaction to Heath, the bamboo basket said, "Come up, young wizard. I'll send you to the underground world." Heath bowed. "Thank you." Then, he walked up to the bamboo basket. The large bamboo basket reminded Heath of the hanging basket he used to sit in at the amusement park when he was a child. It was the same. When he sat on it, it swayed, making him unable to resist grabbing onto the ropes on both sides. Perhaps it was because the magic stones had left a good impression on the bamboo basket, but after seeing Heath's actions, the bamboo basket stopped swaying. At the same time, it comforted him. "Relax, young wizard. Am I shaking too much? Then I'll try my best to stop it." Heath said, "It's all right. I'm probably a little nervous." The bamboo basket laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, it's normal. Every wizard who goes underground for the first time is like this. After all, it's a world tens of thousands of meters away. That world is completely different from the surface of the earth. People who go there for the first time will inevitably be nervous." Heath raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, "Do you often go underground?" The bamboo basket said, "Of course. After all, every wizard who goes underground has to pass by me. Don't underestimate a bamboo basket. I've sent and received many great wizards. Even stigmata-level wizards are not few." Well, this guy seemed to be a vain chatterbox. Heath continued to ask, "What's the underground world like? I heard that it's not quite the same as the surface. Is that so?" "Oh, right, how should I address you? What's your name?" The bamboo basket said, "My name is Gert." After a pause, the bamboo basket continued, "It's indeed a little different from the surface, but that's on the microscopic level. In fact, the macroscopic level is similar. At least from the eyes, the underground world is the same as this place." Heath asked strangely, "The same as here?" In his opinion, there should be a big difference between the underground and here. The bamboo basket said, "That's right. All right, sit tight. I'm going to send you down. I need to keep quiet while working. We'll talk about the rest later." Heath had wanted to ask more, but hearing the bamboo basket's words, he did not continue asking. He nodded and said, "Okay." Just as he said, the bamboo basket put on a serious expression after it entered its working state. It did not look like the chatterbox it was before. It shook its body with a serious expression as if it was adjusting its angle. Then, he heard a series of caw-caw-caw sounds coming from the side of the dry well. The scaffolding that stood above the dry well began to rotate slowly. As the scaffolding rotated, the rope also began to descend to the bottom of the well with the bamboo basket tied to it. Heath walked to the side of the basket and held the bamboo basket with one hand. He stuck his head out to look down the well, hoping to see something. Unfortunately, it was pitch black as far as the eye could see. There was no extra material at all. Crack! 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 The sound of the rotating gears of the scaffolding echoed in the dry well. The hanging basket carried Heath as they slowly descended into the depths of the dry well. After descending for more than 10 minutes, there was no light source in the dry well at all. The entire dry well had sunk into complete darkness. The surroundings were terrifyingly quiet. Suddenly, woo woo woo, woo 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 woo. Suddenly, there was a sound coming from the dark dry well. It sounded like the cry of a girl. Heath looked in the direction of the sound and saw a little girl on the stone wall of the dry well not far away. It was a little girl about 10 years old with 2 braided braids. At this time, she was squatting in a depression of the dry well, hugging her head and crying. Probably sensing Heath's gaze, the little girl rubbed her red eyes and looked up. As she cried, she asked Heath for help. "Big brother, can you help me? Big brother, can you help me?" Her voice had a unique penetrating power, and it seemed to have some kind of magic. After Heath heard it, he inexplicably felt a shiver in his spirit. It was as if a weak nerve in the bottom of his heart had been touched, and he subconsciously wanted to reach out to the little girl for help. He even began to move to the side of the basket. His body began to bounce out of the basket, as if he was trying to pull the little girl back. However, before he could do so, a voice suddenly sounded. "Get away from me, you annoying fellow." With the sound of this voice, a ball of invisible energy instantly swept towards the little girl on the stone wall. From the world of spiritual power, Heath could see a long whip fiercely swinging towards the little girl. It landed heavily on the little girl's body. Ah! The little girl let out an agonizing scream, and then her entire body exploded into a cloud of ash with a bang, completely disappearing into the dry well. As the little girl disappeared, the abnormality of Heath's spiritual power immediately disappeared without a trace. His vision returned to its normal state, and the previous wave of spiritual sympathy disappeared without a trace. Heath returned to his previous state of mind. He could not help but look curiously at the girl who had disappeared into the darkness. At the same time, he asked the bamboo basket, "What was that just now?" The bamboo basket answered briefly, "A ghost." The so-called ghost was actually a special soul energy body that was between a ghost and a human. Under the premise of being of the same level, its power was much weaker than that of a ghost, but the conditions for its birth were also much easier than that of a ghost. Even wizards could create it artificially with the help of special wizard tools. Heath asked, "Why would a ghost appear here?" According to what Heath knew, a ghost should usually appear in a bustling big city, or even where the life force commanded. It was really rare to see a ghost appear in such a place. The bamboo basket said, "These are all put here by wizards. Because there are always some people who are unwilling to pay Gert a few magic stones. Those stingy guys don't even want to pay a few magic stones. So, they stupidly chose not to pay Gert, but to enter themselves. They use the falling feather spell to go lower. But they don't know that there are countless ghosts embedded in the surrounding walls. Without Gert's protection, most of them will end up being eaten by the ghosts." Heath suddenly understood. He immediately thanked again, "Thank you very much." If it wasn't for Gert's insistence, he really didn't want to pay a single cent for this chatterbox just now. But now, he didn't have such thoughts at all. And just now, when the little girl's soul was dissipating, he paid special attention to it. The little girl's overflowing spiritual power clearly showed that the little girl just now had an extremely strong power. Thinking of this, Heath couldn't help but take another look at the bamboo basket under his feet. It looked like an ordinary bamboo basket, but it was even stronger than the ghost. It was really unbelievable. Besides that, Heath was also very curious about the bamboo basket itself. This was because after talking with the bamboo basket, he suddenly realized that he couldn't recognize what kind of creature the bamboo basket belonged to. After learning countless magic knowledge and extracting many wizard libraries, Heath could be described as a wizard encyclopedia at the moment. Basically, as long as it was closely related to wizards, he could always get a general idea, or even grasp their overall appearance. However, at this moment, Heath was surprised to find that he could not recognize which kind of creature the bamboo basket belonged to. There were many demonized creatures that could think and speak. Some of them did look like bamboo baskets, like flying stone slabs or screeching fruits. However, their thinking was not high level, they could not deal with overly complicated commands. They could not be on the same level as the bamboo basket that could quote classics and answer questions fluently. Theoretically speaking, a creature like the bamboo basket should not possess such a level of intelligence. It was not like an ordinary bamboo basket at all. It's probably some kind of alchemy life form that I don't know about, Heath could only guess. The bamboo basket continued to descend. After that, they encountered some special situations one after another. There were quite a number of specters like the little girl just now. These ghosts were not very strong, and they seemed to be very afraid of the bamboo basket. No matter how much Heath shouted, they did not dare to come up easily. They only dared to use all kinds of methods to lure Heath. It seemed that they were trying to pull him out of the bamboo basket. However, with the previous experience, Heath obviously would not be fooled again. No matter what tricks the ghosts outside used against him, he did not care at all. Seeing that Heath was so persistent, the ghosts that surrounded him finally gave up. Soon, the ghosts disappeared into the dark tunnel one by one. Through his spiritual power, Heath could not sense any ghosts around him. After the ghosts left, the bamboo basket that had been silent for a long time broke the conversation again. It said, "These pestering people, even if they die, they won't be able to live in peace. Fortunately, I was prepared in advance. Otherwise, I might have suffered a great loss this time." He thought for a moment and felt that what the bamboo basket said made sense. He thanked it again. "Thank you very much for your help." As he spoke, he took out 2 magic stones and gave them to the bamboo basket. Previously, he had doubted the bamboo basket's ability, but after the battle just now, he had fully understood the strength of the bamboo basket. One had to know that before the little girl was defeated by the bamboo basket, Heath had clearly felt the little girl's powerful elemental fluctuations. It was not inferior to him, and was not inferior to ordinary advanced level wizards. With his current strength, he was still far from being a match for such an attack. If he had not taken the bamboo basket down and used the falling feather spell like an ordinary wizard, then not to mention saving a few magic stones, he might even lose his life. The bamboo basket ate the magic stones and said, "No need to be polite. Since I've eaten your magic stones, I'll naturally send you to a safe place. You don't have to care about those little rascals." Heath asked, "Are they all ghosts?" After waiting for a while, he did not hear any reply from the bamboo basket. Just like how it had suddenly appeared, it seemed to have disappeared again. "Heath." The bamboo basket continued to descend. After the bamboo basket retreated the surrounding ghosts, they did not encounter any other trouble. The small bamboo basket swayed in the air and slowly fell to the ground. Finally, after descending for more than 2 hours, it was no longer pitch black below, but a weak light source appeared. With the appearance of this light source, the outline of the scenery below slowly appeared and gradually appeared before Heath's eyes. Seeing this light source, Heath's eyes could not help but light up. "Are we almost there?" After the bamboo basket continued to move down for dozens of meters, the scene before his eyes became even brighter. Heath looked over and what he saw was actually a piece of sky. Yes, it was a piece of azure blue sky. It was the same as the sky he saw on the surface. There were a few white clouds floating in the blue, curtain-like sky. It looked very comfortable. However, at this time, Heath had a strange expression on his face. This kind of sky and white clouds did not seem to be a problem when viewed alone. However, they were currently underground. Shouldn't the underground be pitch black? Why were there blue sky and white clouds? While Heath was puzzled, the dry well had slowly descended to the bottom of the well. Soon, it passed through the opening and came outside. The surrounding scenery was completely exposed to Heath. When Heath saw the surrounding scenery clearly, he couldn't help but widen his eyes, looking very surprised. Chapter 377. After descending for more than 2 hours, a ball of light suddenly appeared in front of the darkness. It was as if a hole had suddenly appeared in the pitch-black earth. Heath's eyes lit up. "Are we almost there?" The bamboo basket said, "Yes, we can reach our destination after passing through the hole in front." At this moment, a strange force suddenly swept over from all directions. Immediately after, Heath felt that he was firmly held by this strange force field. Then, a feeling of the world spinning came over. It was as if he had changed directions in an instant. It was not just him who had changed directions. It was as if the entire world had turned upside down. The top of his head became his feet, and the bottom of his feet became the top of his head. He had turned around directly. Under the effect of this strange force field, the bamboo basket that had fallen to the ground seemed to have turned up. Heath asked in puzzlement, "What was that?" The bamboo basket said, "Reversed gravity." Heath asked in surprise, "Reversed gravity?" The bamboo basket said, "That's right. When we're on the surface, we step on the ground. But when we're in the ground, we change direction. At that time, we're stepping on the surface, so the gravity will also show a reversal. This causes you to have the feeling that the world has turned around. Heath opened his mouth and said, I see. This was the first time he had heard of such a situation. It turned out that there was such a magical phenomenon underground. He could not help but ask, then are we going up or down? The bamboo basket said, for the surface, of course we're going down. But for the core, we're going up. This is a very complicated relationship. You'll figure it out in the future. In short, for our own feelings, I think you should be clear about this, right? Heath nodded. Going up. He was very clear on this point. He was going up now. All right, we're here. Prepare to welcome the underground world. It will give you a big surprise. The bamboo basket spoke in a show-off manner. As he spoke, the bamboo basket carried Heath and continued to go up for about 100 meters. Then, the darkness in front of his eyes suddenly brightened. Suddenly, it became clear and rose up from an exit. It was the same well entrance as when he went down. Standing in the bamboo basket, Heath turned his head to look at his surroundings. His mouth could not help but open wide, and his eyes were filled with surprise. Heath opened his mouth and asked, is this the underground world? When he was on the surface, he had thought about what the underground world was like. In his imagination, it must be a pitch-black place where no sunlight could be seen all day long. It was like a dark cave. However, at this moment, the view he saw from the underground world was completely different from what he had imagined. It was a lush and fertile grassland with thick and strong trees growing on it. There were colorful flowers blooming around it. When the breeze blew, the flowers, plants, and trees swayed continuously, making hwa-hwa-hwa sounds. It was like the sound of birds chirping and the fragrance of flowers. The sky was not as dark as Heath had thought. On the contrary, there was a bright sun hanging high in the sky. The sky was blue as usual, with white clouds floating around. Heath rubbed his eyes. This is the underground world? Are we really in the underground world? This was no different from the surface, okay? The bamboo basket said slowly, every first-time traveler will be surprised by this. Some even wonder if I sent them in the wrong direction. But this is the reality. Everyone thinks that the underground should be dark and irrelevant, but in fact, there is still sunlight, a perfect ecological environment, and even the civilization here. The wizard world is full of magic. You'll get used to it. Heath looked at the bamboo basket. It was hard to imagine that such philosophical words would come from a bamboo basket. Heath still did not understand what this thing was. Demonized creature? Alchemical life form? Activated item? If it was the former, there was no wisdom seed that grew into a basket in his knowledge, and if it was the latter, it was even more impossible. Neither alchemical life forms nor activated items could have wisdom. Heath said, I haven't consulted you, sir. He was about to ask something, but the bamboo basket seemed to have seen through his doubts and was not prepared to give an answer. Thus, it quickly interrupted Heath's words. The bamboo basket shook its head and said, all right, my work has ended. As for the other doubts, they are not within my scope of answers. Then, we will meet again in the future. I wish you good luck, young wizard. After saying that, the bamboo basket shook and threw Heath out. Then, it slowly descended and quickly sank into the bottom of the well, disappearing in front of Heath's eyes. Looking at the direction where the bamboo basket left, Heath said, what a strange thing. Seeing that the bamboo basket was unwilling to talk more, Heath did not ask further. After sending the bamboo basket away, he turned his gaze to the strange land in front of him. This seemed to be a forest. The trees were lush and the vegetation was rich. It should have a very good ecological environment. Such a place should have materials that can be extracted, right? As he silently guessed in his heart, Heath immediately called out to the system in his heart, System, open the range extraction. He immediately opened the range extraction of the system and scanned the surroundings. As expected, right after he gave the order, the system quickly sent him a series of feedback. Beep, 30 degrees east, 20 meters ahead, extractable found. Host is advised to extract. Beep, 22 degrees east, 77 meters ahead, extractable found. Host is advised to extract. Beep, 28 degrees east. The system notifications rang in Heath's ears one after another. At the same time, a series of data lists popped up on the system's message board. Heath was overjoyed. Haha, that's great. He immediately walked in the first direction the system notified him of. It was 30 degrees east. After walking about 20 meters in that direction, he quickly arrived at a small grassland. And on this grassland, Heath immediately saw the extraordinary substance indicated by the system. It was a purple flower. It looked a bit like a rose, but it was a size smaller than a rose. The stamen of the flower was much larger. The petals were purple, and the edges of the petals were covered with a circle of black patterns. It looked exceptionally beautiful. It was particularly eye-catching in the middle of a green grassland. Amethyst rose. Seeing this rose, Heath's eyes lit up. He recognized the identity of the rose. It was a very rare magical plant, a type of plant that had a very strong elemental energy. What was even more unique was that its elemental nature was very gentle. Even if it was consumed directly, it could increase a wizard's spiritual power. Because of this, in ancient times, this rose was also one of the greatest nourishment for many wizards to speed up their cultivation. But because of this, a large number of wizards at that time collected them, to the extent that it was said that this plant was now completely extinct. I say, where did those ancient roses on the market come from? Looks like they probably came from underground. While wandering in the wizard market a few times, Heath had seen some wizards take out these amethyst roses to auction. At that time, he was very curious about it. After all, the amethyst roses taken out by those wizards were still very fresh. They did not look like they had been preserved since ancient times until now. At that time, he had suspected the origin of these amethyst roses. Now, it seemed that they were all collected from the underground world. Good stuff, good stuff. Heath was happy in his heart. He opened his dimensional pocket and took out one item after another, preparing to collect this amethyst rose. The amethyst rose was different from ordinary magic plants. Although it was a plant, it had a certain ability to sense external things. It also knew danger, resistance, self-protection, and so on. Moreover, this kind of plant also had a very strong magic talent. It was born to be able to cast many spells. It was extremely difficult to deal with. Heath took out a magic pen and drew a magic array on the spot. This was a magic array of the nature of a barrier, which could block the elemental space within a certain area. After drawing the magic array, Heath clapped his hands in the middle and then pressed them on the ground. Immediately, the magic array flashed with a dazzling beam of light, and the entire space became distorted. Then, another invisible barrier formed around the amethyst rose. The amethyst rose obviously sensed danger. Its purple stamen turned dark red. At the same time, a small hexagram magic array appeared around it. Crash! The ground was thrown into the air. A few sharp thorns shot out from the ground and quickly wrapped around Heath. Heath, who had been prepared for this, waved his hand. A silver metal shield opened up in front of him. The thorns hit the silver shield hard. However, other than the splashing sounds and silver liquid, the thorns still could not break through the silver shield. At the same time, Heath continued to move his hands. As he chanted the incantation and the runes returned in seconds. The space around the amethyst rose became more and more solid. When Heath's last syllable fell, a square barrier had completely covered the amethyst rose. Then, Heath immediately mobilized his magic power to extract the elements from the sealed barrier. Like a pump, under the effect of Heath's full power, the elements of the barrier surged out like a river that had burst its banks. Soon, all the elements in the enclosed space were sucked clean. At the same time, the magic luster on the amethyst rose quickly dimmed, and the ferocious spell suddenly stopped. This was a spell that Heath had recently developed. He created it based on the knowledge of runology, enchantment, basic laws of magic, and so on. The operation mechanism of this spell was to first set up a barrier around the opponent's body, completely placing the opponent in an independent space. Then, through magic, all the elements in this space would be extracted. This space would become a zero space without any elements. It must be known that no matter what demonized creature wanted to cast a spell, the premise was that there must be active elements in the surroundings. The little magic power in the body of the wizard was only used as a casting primer. A spell relied on the elements that were everywhere in the world. Because of this, when Heath finished extracting all the elements in the space, there was no condition for casting a spell in this space. No matter what kind of spell they cast, it would be impossible to succeed. As the elements were extracted in large quantities, the amethyst rose's aggressive spells quickly withered. Soon, it completely stopped shaking. It's really easy. DS. Although he said so, Heath was still not careless. He released his spiritual tentacles to continue checking. After confirming that the thing was indeed silent, he finally released the barrier around him. Then, he walked up and broke the amethyst rose with one hand. This thing knew a lot of magic. If he did not destroy it as soon as possible, he would be in trouble later. Holding the amethyst rose that he picked, Heath chanted in his heart, "Extract." Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.6. Beep, extraction successful. Vitality plus 0.2. Beep, extraction successful. Seeing the series of numbers on the system prompt, Heath was extremely surprised. Tisk tisk, he could extract 0.6 spiritual power in one go. This was not bad. After becoming an intermediate rank wizard, Heath's training speed had greatly decreased. Now, even 0.1 points of spiritual power would require several months of painstaking training before he could reach it. This sudden increase of 0.6 points of spiritual power was equivalent to several months of his hard work. Haha, as expected of the underground world. This trip really wasn't in vain. Besides increasing his spiritual power, the amethyst rose was a very precious magic material. If it could be brought to the market, it was not surprising that the amethyst rose of the same species could be sold for hundreds of thousands of magic stones. However, Heath was not planning to sell his amethyst rose. After all, such a treasure should be kept in his hands for research. There were also many magic experiments that could be used to test the amethyst rose. After keeping the amethyst rose, Heath continued his exploration of the underground. This time, he went to the second place the system notified him. What he found here was a round grass with a sawtooth pattern. It was rootless grass. This was the same as the amethyst rose. It was also a magic plant that had survived from ancient times. Previously, Heath had only seen the existence of this plant in books. What is this place? Why are there so many ancient magical creatures here? Turning his head, Heath was puzzled. Chapter 378. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.3. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained life sequence, strange maggot grass. Beep, extraction successful. Strength plus 0.2. Crisp notifications rang in Heath's ears. Along with these sounds, balls of energy and information continuously surged into Heath's body, allowing his strength to increase bit by bit. The amethyst rose he had found earlier was only one of the many species that existed in this forest in ancient times, such as the strange maggot grass, the wizard king flower, the careful fruit, and so on. In the past, Heath had only seen these things in some books and ancient books. He had never come into contact with them in the market or even in the laboratory. As for species that had never been extracted before, the system had always given preferential treatment. It was the same now. When Heath entered this place, it was as if he had entered a supermarket. Basically, he could extract attributes with every few steps. It had been a long time since he had extracted attributes so quickly. For a moment, Heath was simply carried away as he walked into this forest. He opened the system and extracted attributes everywhere. His method of extracting attributes was to first use a range extraction scan to locate the location of the extraction material. After that, he would walk over and personally collect the extraction material before extracting it. Although the system had been upgraded and could be extracted from a distance, it did not matter even if he did not walk in front of it. However, the distance was related to the number of attributes of the extracted substance. Heath calculated in detail. Sometimes, the difference could be more than 3 times. For example, extracting spiritual power from a distance only yielded 0.1. However, if he were to collect it from a close distance and had direct contact with it, it was enough to extract 0.3 attributes. It was becoming more and more difficult to increase one's strength. Every single attribute was extremely precious. Since it was a rare opportunity, Heath would naturally not waste these opportunities. As he continued to extract, Heath soon arrived at the depths of the forest. Just as he was about to pass through a forest, a voice suddenly came from afar. "Rose, quickly leave that place. Quickly return to the tribe." "No, Al, I'm not leaving, I don't want to leave you. If you don't leave now, it'll be too late. I won't be able to get away from him for long. You'll die here. Please, leave." "No, Al. No, Al." It was a male's anxious shout, accompanied by a female's sobbing voice. The voice came from a very far place, at least a few hundred meters away from where Heath was. It was only because Heath's hearing was too sharp that he could hear it. Someone is there. Heath raised his eyebrows and immediately went into stealth mode. In this unfamiliar forest, it was another area that he had never come into contact with before. No matter who it was better to be careful. Then, he thought for a moment and decided to go over and take a look. His figure flashed, and in a few flashes, he quickly went over there. His current speed was like a gale. When he ran, one could only see some afterimages in the air. In a few flashes, Heath had already arrived at the area where the sounds came from. It was a wide open space, and there were a few sparse trees growing on the open space. In the middle of the open space, Heath saw the two figures who had made the sound. They seemed to be two humans, but they were different from humans in the conventional sense. Their sizes were very small, almost 1/3 of that of a normal human, and they were only about the height of Heath's knees. They looked like two exquisitely made puppets. Heath's eyes lit up. Gnomes. Gnomes, also known as small people and underground gnomes, were one of the 9 great races, one of the underground races, the intelligent species. Their situation was just the opposite of the northern giants. Their appearance was very similar to that of humans, but they were much smaller than ordinary humans, about 1/5 to 1/3 of the size of a normal human. So there really is such a creature. Heath clicked his tongue in wonder. He had only read about underground gnomes in books in the past because it was said that they could not leave the underground because of their different physiological structures. Once they left the underground and went to the surface, they would die. Therefore, it was basically difficult to see living underground smalls on the surface. Some of them were basically specimens in some laboratories, but Heath had never come into contact with them before. The two underground smalls were a man and a woman. Judging from their appearance, they were about 20 to 30 years old. They seemed to be a young couple or lovers. The two seemed to be in trouble. What was bothering them was a nightmare damask. It was a magical plant from ancient times. It looked like a man-eating flower. There was a bud on the long root that could be closed. It was like a big shell with sharp teeth on the edge of the bud. This flower would take the initiative to prey on passing creatures. Although its body could not move, it could control the vines. Once a creature passed by, it would control its vines to entangle it and drag it back into the bud to eat it. This was the case for the two underground gnomes. The male underground gnome had been tied up by the long roots in the depths of the pod. It was pulling his waist back. The man held a stone spear in his hand and tried to resist. However, in front of the tightening vines of the nightmare damask, his resistance was getting weaker and weaker. It was only a matter of time before he was dragged away. The nightmare damask was a large magical plant. Its flower bud pocket was about 2 meters in diameter. Even a standard human like Heath could fit in this size, not to mention that the underground gnome was only 1/3 of his size. One could imagine what the consequences would be if he was swept away by this vine. Seeing that it was inevitable that he would be swept away, the man could only let the woman leave. After all, the woman was still holding on to him. If he was swept away, the woman would be dragged away as well. However, no matter what he said, the woman refused to leave. Seeing this, the man's face was full of sweat. Before he could think of a way, a piece of bad news came. Crack! Crack! A faint cracking sound was heard. The soil on the ground began to loosen. It was the man's stone spear. Although the man had stabbed the stone spear very deeply, it still could not withstand the powerful strength of nightmare damask. As the nightmare damask kept tightening the vines, the stone spear was pulled out of the ground bit by bit. The wooden part in the spear started to show signs of breaking. Finally, after a few seconds, the stone spear broke into two with a crack. The man who lost the stone spear was instantly lifted up into the sky by the vines, and the woman who was holding him was dragged over as well like two grasshoppers tied by ropes. Ah! Rose! Just as the two of them were about to lose their lives, suddenly... Hoo! Hoo! The sound of rushing wind could be heard. Along with this sound, a figure suddenly appeared in the forest. Immediately after, a clear metallic clanging sound could be heard. A scarlet greatsword drew out a dazzling cold light in the air. Pa! A light sound rang out. The vines that tied the man's waist snapped in unison from the middle, and the man and woman that had been swept up into the air also fell down. Holding the greatsword, Heath stood in front of the two underground gnomes and helped them out of the situation. This was his first time here, so he didn't know anything about the underground world's situation, and he needed a guide. Now that there were two intelligent underground gnomes that he could communicate with, he naturally could not miss this opportunity. He lowered his head and looked at the two underground gnomes. At this moment, the two of them had already fallen from the sky. They did not suffer much damage and were still conscious. It was just that they seemed to be a little confused about what had happened all of a sudden. Now was not the time to communicate. Heath gave them a simple instruction: stay away from here. Be careful. After saying that, he turned his attention back to the nightmare damask. The nightmare damask was a magic plant that Heath had read about in a book. Although it was only a magic plant, its strength was extremely powerful. It was no less than an average intermediate level wizard. It was extremely difficult to deal with an opponent that could control vines and control a small amount of plant type, spirit type, and earth type magic. Even if it was just a pot of plants, Heath would not dare to underestimate such an opponent. The battle soon drew to a close. After the two underground gnomes were rescued by Heath, Nightmare Damask's aggro was quickly transferred to Heath. Only the sound of pa 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 could be heard. The vines that were as thick as an arm fluttered in the wind, and they were so dense that they looked like dancing strands of hair. The thousands of vines paused in the air for a moment, and then a series of shoo 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 sounds could be heard. They were like javelins that were shot out, thrusting straight at Heath. Heath's figure flashed, and he hurriedly dodged to the side. The instant he dodged to the side, these vines heavily pierced the ground. Boom! 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 A series of explosion-like sounds could be heard. Wherever these vines pierced, large holes would be blasted open. In an instant, the ground became filled with potholes. It was as if a meteor shower had just occurred. Such powerful strength. Seeing this scene, Heath could not help but be secretly shocked. It was not difficult to create such a large pit by himself. A random apprentice-level spell could do it. Even a knight could use a powerful sword to do it. However, it was not easy to create such a dense large pit. Only a few high-intensity spells could do it. It must be known that this was only the ordinary attack of the Nightmare Damask. As expected of an high-level magic plant. Heath praised in his heart. He did not want to be outdone. He raised the great sword in his hand and brandished it to meet the vines that the Nightmare Damask threw at him. Hoo hoo hoo! Pa pa pa! Ka ka ka! For a moment, the sound of the wind breaking, the sound of the vines flapping, and the sound of the great sword cutting through the vines reverberated in the forest. Heath's red demon great sword was brandished like a windmill. The vines that were flying over were cut off in large swaths by him. The fierce battle continued for several minutes before it gradually weakened, and in the end, the one who gained the upper hand was obviously Heath. No matter how powerful the Nightmare Damask was, it was still just a plant without intelligence. It only had brute force and did not know how to use strategy. As long as it was slowly exhausted, it would eventually be exhausted to death. After a few minutes of fierce battle, Heath cut off its vines bit by bit while maintaining a certain distance from its core. Heath had read about it in a book. A magical plant like the Nightmare Damask had a certain distance limit when casting spells. As long as he did not get too close to the core, he would not be attacked by magic. As expected, Heath did not get close to it. This resulted in the Nightmare Damask not being able to use magic to attack Heath. It was unable to use magic, and the remaining vines were nothing to Heath. With this method of fighting, Heath quickly cleared out all the vines outside the Nightmare Damask. After losing the vines, the Nightmare Damask still had a large area of lush vegetation, but it was basically useless. It was not a threat. Facing these plants, Heath decisively gave them. Bang! With a soft sound, a ball of flame suddenly bloomed on Heath's fingertip. It had been a long time since the indestructible had appeared. Heath raised the ball of flame and pointed at the Nightmare Damask in front of him. Immediately, the flame in his hand turned into a line of fire and shot straight at the Nightmare Damask, hitting the Nightmare Damask in an instant. Flames had a unique advantage over plant-type spells. When the flame hit the Nightmare Damask, it instantly engulfed the Nightmare Damask. In an instant, the Nightmare Damask burned in large areas. The thick vegetation covering the core was instantly burnt down. After the vigorous flames burned up the vegetation on the outside, they went straight for the core of the Nightmare Damask. However, when it was about to burn the core of the Nightmare Damask, Heath chanted a spell in advance to extinguish the flames. The Nightmare Damask was a very high-level magic plant. Heath was looking forward to extracting valuable attributes from it. Of course, he could not let it turn into ashes under the flames. After extinguishing the flames, Heath immediately walked towards the Nightmare Damask, ready to harvest it. When he was not far away from the nightmare damask, a faint green light suddenly appeared around the nightmare damask. Apparently, it was planning to cast some spell. However, most of the nightmare damask spells were closely related to its accompanying vegetation. This vegetation had been completely burned by Heath in the previous flames. Now, of course, it could not respond to the nightmare damask's call. Chapter 379. Crack. There was a loud sound. The nightmare damask's large flower bud flew high into the air. Then, with a loud bang, it crashed heavily onto the ground, sending up a large amount of dust. The broken root of the nightmare damask was struggling violently on the ground. The green light around the root was constantly shining and dimming. It was the symbol of a healing spell. The guy who had lost its head was still trying to heal itself. Unfortunately, such a fatal injury was not something that its spell could recover from. After struggling for a while, the nightmare damask also dimmed down. It did not know how to heal anymore. Then, Heath walked forward. After scanning the large flower bud of the nightmare damask, Heath placed one hand on the nightmare damask and chanted in his heart, "Extract." Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.6. Beep, extraction successful. Vitality plus 0.2. Beep, extraction successful. Toughness increased. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained life sequence, nightmare damask. A series of notifications rang in Heath's ears. Purest energy surged into Heath's body. Not only was the spiritual power he had expended earlier replenished, the mana pool in his spiritual sea also expanded a little. The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruitnoelo. Tisk tisk, 0.6 spiritual power. As expected of a high-level magic plant. Feeling the surging spiritual power surging into his body, even Heath, who had absorbed an unknown amount of material, could not help but exclaim in admiration. 0.6 spiritual power. If he were to cultivate normally, it would take at least a few months of effort. After a while, Heath digested the extracted material. Then, he looked at the huge bud in front of him, looking at the unique jagged shape of the ancient plant. The corners of Heath's mouth could not help but curve. Magic plants had always been in high demand in the wizard world. Ancient magic plants like the nightmare damask, which could not be found on the surface, were even more valuable. This flower bud alone could be sold for at least a dozen high-level magic stones on the market. One had to know that it was worth more than 100,000 magic stones. Even for an intermediate-level wizard like Heath, this was a considerable income. Haha, my luck is too good. I just came here and got a good thing. Heath was extremely happy. Oh my god, Al, how are you? Don't scare me, don't scare me. Wake up, please. Please. Sob sob sob. At this moment, a burst of crying came from behind. Heath turned his head and found that it was the two underground gnomes he had just saved. At this time, the male underground gnome seemed to be in some kind of situation. He was lying on the ground motionlessly as if he had fallen into a coma. The female underground gnome was hugging his head and sobbing continuously. The sobbing just now was made by the female underground gnome. Heath raised his eyebrows and walked over. Let me see. Since he had already saved them, Heath would certainly not sit idly by. Hearing Heath's voice, the female underground gnome suddenly raised her head. When she saw that it was the person who had just saved their lives, her eyes immediately lit up. She quickly stood up, grabbed Heath's pant leg, and kept pleading, "Wizard, please save Al. Please save Al. Without my husband, I can't survive here." Heath said, "Don't worry, I'll take a look first." Waving his hand, Heath spread out his wizard's force field and pushed the female underground gnome to the side. Then he squatted down to examine the male underground gnome. From the looks of it, the underground gnome should have been poisoned. His face was completely purplish-green, and there was a black mist-like aura surrounding his body. He had completely fallen into a deep coma. All of this meant that the underground gnome in front of him had been poisoned. Combined with the nightmare damask from before, it was completely certain that he had been poisoned. Other than casting spells, the nightmare damask also had a special poison. This poison had an extremely strong paralyzing effect and could be transmitted directly to the thorns on its vines through its roots. During the process of entangling the enemy, the thorns would send the poison into the target's body. Once the poison was injected into the target would lose its ability to move until it was completely eaten by the nightmare damask. Heath lowered his head and looked at the body of the small underground gnome. As expected, there was now a small hole where the nightmare damask's vines had entangled. A row of dark green liquid was flowing out of the small hole. This must be the poison that had seeped into the underground gnome previously. The situation is really not good. The paralyzing toxins contained in the nightmare damask were among the best in the field of toxins. Just a small amount was enough to paralyze an elephant. Even a high-level demonized creature would not be able to withstand such a large amount of paralyzing toxins. After a series of checks, Heath could not help but frown. His action immediately caused Rose to be shocked. The woman hurriedly walked forward and said in a panic, "Wizard, Sir Wizard, Al. Is Al all right? Can you save him?" Sob, sob, sob. As she spoke, tears fell down her cheeks. Seeing this, Heath quickly relaxed his frown and comforted, "Don't worry, he will be fine." Although high-level demonized creatures could not withstand it, they would be fine if it was a small underground gnome like this. Heath had read about it in a book. It was said that because they grew in the forest, each generation of underground gnomes had accompanied the poisonous insects and poisons in the forest. There were always underground gnomes who died under the poison. However, it was also because of this that the strong survived and the weak were eliminated. After generations of elimination and elimination, the underground gnomes would constantly choose the best species and evolve and improve themselves. The resistance of this generation of underground gnomes had already reached a level that could not be invaded by far-reaching poisons. Even against a powerful poison like the nightmare damasks, they would have some resistance. Then, Heath once again used the wizard's force field to push the female underground gnome far away. This thing was making a lot of noise here. In treating the injured, especially to ensure the safety of the person whose lungs had been invaded by the poison, silence was especially important. Ding ding ding. The sound of glass bottles colliding was heard. Heath took out glass beakers and test tubes from his dimensional pocket, then took out all kinds of materials and began to make potions on the spot. The potion he wanted to make was the antidote of the nightmare damask. Although he had never come into contact with a magical plant like the nightmare damask before, Heath knew a little about its characteristics, especially about its poison. Heath knew that it was a high-intensity paralytic poison. Since it was a high-intensity paralytic potion, he just needed to concoct the antidote in the same way as the paralytic potion. Even if there were some differences in the final concoction, it would still be effective in curing it. Many things in the wizard world were like this. No matter how they changed, they could not be separated from the essence. Just like magic, no matter what kind of magic it was, it could never be separated from magic power, spells, and runes. After checking the underground gnome's wound once again to confirm the characteristics of the poison, Heath began to prepare the potion. After all these years of training, he was undoubtedly an old player in the wizard world now. He could easily use all kinds of materials. When he finished using them, he conveniently placed them in the air above his head. After he became proficient in the use of the wizard's force field, Heath was used to opening the wizard's force field every time he concocted potions. This way, it was convenient to store the used materials and various equipment in his force field when he concocted potions. Just like now, a few test tubes that he had used flew above his head and rotated around. It was very convenient to use any of the materials. Ding ding dang dang. Ping ping pong. Bang 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 bang. The sound of glass vessels colliding, the sound of material cutting, the sound of potions burning and exploding, all kinds of sounds echoed in the forest. In a short while, Heath had finished preparing the potion. He picked up the test tube and swirled it in front of his eyes, checking the quality of the potion. It should be almost done. Then, Heath handed the potion to Rose and said, "Give this to your husband and try to drink it." The female underground gnome took the potion from Heath as if it was a treasure. She did not have time to thank him. She quickly held up Al's head and fed him the potion. "Al, quick, Sir Wizard's potion. Drink Sir Wizard's potion. You will be fine. You will be fine." The potion slowly flowed out of his mouth. Rose stared nervously at Al's face. Heath couldn't help but look over. Although he was confident in the potion he made, it was still a magic plant he had never come into contact with. At the same time, the underground gnomes were a creature he didn't know much about. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Heath's performance in reality did not disappoint him. After waiting for a while, there were some changes to Al. First was his face. His face had turned black at that moment. His entire face was as black as ink. His face was covered with a thick layer of dark green. At that moment, the dark green quickly retreated at a speed visible to the naked eye. The black on his face also quickly disappeared. Other than that, there was also the black fog surrounding Al's body. After being poisoned, a thick layer of black fog had appeared around Al's body. However, at this moment, this black fog was also rapidly retreating, just like the dark green color on his face. In less than 10 seconds, the black and dark green color on Al's face had completely disappeared. The black fog surrounding his body had also completely collapsed and disappeared. Then, Al, who had been unconscious, suddenly frowned and coughed. Cough. Cough. With his cough, the male underground gnome opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. Ugh! He cried out in pain, opened his eyes, and slowly woke up. Where am I? Rose, who had been standing by the side, cried with joy. She hugged Al tightly. Oh! Al! My Al! You're finally awake, you're finally awake! Thank God, thank Sir Wizard! The male underground gnome's blurry eyes lingered on Rose for a while, and then the confusion in his eyes quickly cleared, as if he remembered what had happened before. Rose? Oh my God, where's the nightmare damask? Where's the nightmare damask? Why are you still here? As he spoke, he struggled to sit up. Rose quickly said, it's okay, Al. We're fine now. The nightmare damask has been destroyed. Al was stunned. Destroyed? Rose said, yes, it's Sir Wizard. Sir Wizard destroyed the nightmare damask and saved you from the nightmare damask. You scared me just now. I thought I was going to lose you forever. Al looked in the direction of the nightmare damask. Only then did he realize that there was only a mess and fragments of the nightmare damask on the ground. His tensed face relaxed. Rose pulled him and said, quick, thanks Sir Wizard. Rose helped Al up. The two of them walked toward Heath. They bowed deeply and said, thank you, Sir Wizard. You saved Rose and Al. You saved Rose and Al. Heath smiled lightly and said, it was just a small matter. You don't need to thank me. Al glanced at Heath and asked curiously, Sir Wizard, you don't seem to be a wizard from this area. Looking at your clothes, you should be from the surface, right? Yes, I'm from the old land. I just came underground today. Ah, that's great. Al said happily. What do you mean? Al realized that he had lost his composure and laughed dryly. He then explained, ha, it's like this. You just came here, so you must not have settled down yet. In that case, why don't you follow Al and Rose back to our tribe? We'll treat you well to repay you for saving our lives. Heath subconsciously wanted to refuse. After all, he only wanted to find 2 guides. However, on second thought, although Al had woken up, the injuries on his body were still not light. It was basically impossible for him to be his guide for a while, and Rose could not abandon Al to be his guide. Then, it seemed that he could only go to their tribe to find a guide. It's getting late. I might as well go and rest for the night. Looking at the sky, it was getting late. Although he didn't know why there was a sun underground, it was obvious that there were day and night here. In that case, he might as well rest for the night and talk about it tomorrow. Chapter 380. After making the decision, Heath immediately followed Al and Rose to their tribe. Along the way, Heath also got a general understanding of the current generation through Al and Rose. According to them, this generation was called the Nightmare Forest because it was filled with something called nightmares. It seemed to be a creature or something, but Heath wasn't sure yet. However, from the description of Al and the others, it seemed to be a very terrifying substance. When the two of them mentioned the nightmare, Heath noticed that their expressions had changed greatly. We have to return to the tribe before sunset, Sir Wizard. Otherwise, the nightmare will come. No one is willing to face the nightmare. Believe us, even a wizard would avoid the nightmare. The tribe they were going to was on the west side of the forest. It was called the Ashud tribe. It was said that the first person who built this camp was a wizard. With the help of that wizard, they had this place to rest. After that, they named the tribe after the wizard. After walking around the forest for more than 2 hours, Heath followed Al and the others to the west side of the Ashud tribe. From a distance, the tribe was built on a small hill. The tribe was surrounded by a strategic low stone wall made of crushed stones. A circle of sharpened logs was inserted around the stone wall to form a fence. The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruitnoelo. There was a large door in front of them. There were 2 arrow towers on both sides of the door. It looked like it was heavily guarded, as if this place was often attacked. Hey! These stone walls! Heath suddenly stopped when he arrived at the gate of the camp. His sight fell on the stone walls. These walls looked like rough stone walls built randomly. However, when he got closer, Heath could clearly feel a strong elemental wave from them. What's wrong, Sir Wizard? Seeing Heath stop, Al and Rose who were walking beside him also stopped and turned to look at Heath. Heath was puzzled. Did you build these stone walls? Al nodded. Yes, Sir Wizard. These are the warriors of our tribe. We worked together to build them. It took us more than 60 moons to build them. Heath picked up the stone and touched it. It was an ordinary stone. After leaving this area, it immediately lost its elemental fluctuations. It seems to be coming from below. After carefully feeling it, Heath noticed that the elemental fluctuations were coming from underground. It was as if something was releasing elements from underground. It rose straight up and formed an elemental wall in the air. Heath asked, "Do you know what's under this stone?" Al thought for a moment and said, "That was left behind by the wizard. It's a circle. The wizard said that this circle can ensure that we are not eroded by nightmares. The stones behind us are piled up according to this circle." Heath suddenly understood. According to Al, the situation was clear at a glance. There was probably a magic array below. It was probably used to resist the so-called nightmares in the forest. This made Heath come to a conclusion. Although he did not know what the nightmares outside were, he would definitely meet these nightmares in the future when he walked in the forest. Now, he could use the magic array left by the wizard to determine the main purpose of these magic arrays, and then deduce the identity of the nightmares outside. At the very least, he would be able to figure out their weaknesses and so on in case he would be flustered when he encountered them in the future. Heath said, "Can I take a look at these patterns?" Al hesitated. This. The tribesmen in the tribe had spent a lot of effort to build these. Their entire tribe's safety was on these walls. Even if Heath had saved him, he did not dare to rashly agree to Heath's request. Seeing this, Heath quickly said, "Oh, I'm being rude. Forget it, I'm just curious. It's nothing important." He could use magic to secretly tear down the stone wall at night and restore it later. With his ability, he could do it without anyone knowing. There was no need to force him. Al let out a sigh of relief and quickly said, "I'm very sorry, Sir Wizard. This stone wall is related to the safety of our race. I don't dare to rashly promise you anything." Heath nodded. I understand." Then, the few of them continued to walk into the camp. When they got close to the camp gate, they heard 2 berating voices from afar. "Intruders! Intruders! Everyone, get up quickly! Be on guard! Be on guard!" The anxious shouts rang out, and the entire camp was thrown into chaos. Small people could be seen running around the camp. For a time, the sound of clanking rang out continuously. Not long after, a large group of underground gnomes with long hair gathered at the entrance of the camp. The underground gnomes who were stepping on the ground also picked up their weapons and pointed them at Heath, as if they were facing a great enemy. "I'm very sorry, Sir Wizard. We are often attacked by the forest, so the tribe is always in a state of tension. When they see you coming, they may think that you are an enemy." To ordinary humans or wizards, Heath was a friendly species. But to the underground gnomes, Heath, who was several times larger than them, was no different from the beasts in the forest. They were all monsters that could attack their camp or even cause great damage. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" "It's me. It's me and Rose." "Damn it, keep quiet." "Ah, it's Al who's back." "It's Al and Rose." An older-looking underground gnome rushed out from the camp. After confirming that it was indeed Al, he quickly gave the order to alert the camp. The originally nervous mood in the camp suddenly relaxed. Everyone immediately went forward and completely entered the camp. Although when he looked outside, Heath felt that this camp looked very small, but when they really got close to it, he could feel that it was small and exquisite. The entire camp was decorated with a certain number of small houses and tents. These houses and tents were very exquisite and unique. The largest one looked like it was only the height of a table, just like a large toy. Underground gnomes like Al and Rose, who were only as tall as Heath's calf, shuttled back and forth in the camp, doing all kinds of things. At first glance, it was as if he had walked into a small country in a fairy tale world. Just as Heath was surprised, Al's companions had also come forward to welcome them. The leader was the old underground gnome who had given the order to disarm his companions. He walked over from afar and shouted at Al, Al. Al also greeted him, Elder Albert. Albert frowned and asked, "What's going on with you and Rose? Didn't you go to collect three-eyed mushrooms? Why are you only back now?" On the way, Heath had heard Al mention that he and Rose appeared in the forest to collect a plant called the three-eyed mushroom. This was an item that they would use in their tribe's sacrificial ceremony. Al quickly said, "We were attacked. It was the nightmare Damask. Rose and I almost couldn't come back. It was thanks to the help of Sir Wizard." As he spoke, he roughly told Albert what had happened. When he heard Al mention the word wizard, Albert's eyes clearly lit up. His gaze immediately focused on Heath, and the friendliness and gratitude in his eyes were obvious. Previously, Heath had heard Al mention that their tribe had almost been wiped out when they were in danger. In the end, a wizard who happened to pass by saved them and moved their entire tribe here. Before he left, he even built a layer of protection for their tribe, so the entire tribe felt heartfelt gratitude towards the wizard. At this moment, he heard Al say that the one who saved him was another wizard. Albert naturally had a good impression of him. Thus, after Al finished his story, Albert hurriedly walked towards Heath. He bowed and said, "I am an elder of the Ashut tribe. Thank you very much for your help, Sir Wizard. You saved Al and Rose. You are the benefactor of the entire Ashut tribe." Heath politely said, "It's just a small matter. You don't have to take it to heart." Albert was about to say something, but before he could finish, a violent cough came from the side. Al's body shook and he almost fell to the ground. Rose quickly supported him. Cough. 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 Al, how are you? Don't scare me. Sir Wizard, please look at Al. What's wrong with Al? Rose was obviously frightened and quickly shouted to Heath. Heath walked over and let Al sit on the ground. Then he stretched out his spiritual power to check, took out a dagger to pierce Al's skin, and squeezed out some blood to observe for a while. Then he explained, "Nothing, it's just that the poison hasn't been completely removed. In addition to the previous injury, his body is a bit weak and needs more rest. My magic potion can only help him get rid of most of the poison, and cannot help him recover his body. If he wants to fully recover, he needs to rest for a while." Rose let out a sigh of relief. Heath then said to Albert, "Your clansman was seriously injured. I suggest we don't stand here. He needs a quiet place to rest." Albert quickly said, Okay. Rose, take your husband back to rest. Leave Sir Wizard too." "Me? Yes, Elder." Rose agreed and quickly left with Al. It could be seen that Al still wanted to express his gratitude to Heath, but his body was not very comfortable, so he did not have the strength. Before leaving, Al still tried very hard to say to Heath, "Sir Wizard, please wait for me for 2 days. I will take you to the forest after I have rested." On the way, Heath had already explained to Al that he needed 2 guides, and Al agreed without hesitation. After all, this underground gnome was also thinking about how to repay Heath for saving his life. Heath smiled and said, "It's okay. You should rest first, Al. I'm not in a hurry here." Since he had already come here, he might as well stay here for 2 days. When he entered this area, Heath had noticed that there were many plants around that he had never extracted before. Heath planned to use this camp as the center. He wanted to extract all the plants around so that he could increase his strength. Al and Rose left. Albert said, "Sir Wizard, please follow me. I'll arrange a place for you. I'll get the tribesmen to prepare it." Heath looked at the small tents around him and said, "There's no need to trouble yourself. Just find me an empty space. I have my own place." The largest room here was only the size of a cabinet. It was difficult to fit Heath's legs, let alone live in it. For such an underground gnome tribe, Heath was like a giant here. How could they find a place for him to live? Albert hesitated. "This." Heath smiled. "Elder, don't worry. I'm a wizard. Magic is my forte, isn't it?" As he spoke, he spread out his hand, and rays of light suddenly bloomed in his palm. The rays of light interweaved and rotated in his palm, continuously combining into various things. Albert's eyes were dazzled. "Oh! Magic, It's magic! The underground gnomes nearby who saw this scene also gathered over. Every underground gnome exclaimed from the bottom of their hearts. Magic? Oh! It's magic! What a beautiful beam of light! It can change! Is that the power of a wizard? It's even more powerful than the shaman. These underground gnome did not come into contact with magic many times. The last time they hosted a wizard was a long time ago. At that time, many of their clansmen were not even born yet. Seeing that, Albert did not hesitate anymore. He nodded and said, "Okay, in that case, please follow me." Then, Heath followed Albert all the way to an empty space on the left side of the camp, about the size of a basketball court. Albert pointed at the empty space and said, "This is the place where the warriors of our tribe used to train. But now, we have smoothed out an empty space for training. This empty space is vacant. Sir Wizard, you can use it as you please. Is it enough?" Heath nodded. "It's more than enough." Then he took out 2 beans from his pocket and prepared to cast a spell. In an instant, Albert and the underground gnomes around him looked over curiously. They all wanted to know how Heath was going to conjure a house out of thin air. Chapter 381. Heath opened his dimensional pocket and took out a few small beans. They were 2 thumb-sized beans. They looked like 2 ordinary broad beans, greenish-gray in color. Similarly, there was a small gap in one corner of the beans, and a sprout grew out of it. Heath held the beans and chanted a syllable. Then, he scattered the beans on the ground, and the beans fell into the soil. Whoosh! Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of wind breaking could be heard. A light breeze suddenly blew over from afar, as if indicating that something was about to happen. At the same time, a slight vibration came from the ground. The tender shoots at the corner of the 2 beans that had fallen to the ground suddenly grew. With 2 cracking sounds, the tender shoots broke through the corner of the broad bean. Then, they grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, they were as thick as a hemp rope and was still expanding rapidly. It's expanding, it's expanding. The beans are expanding. It's so magical. Is this magic? Is this magic? A series of exclamations immediately sounded. The underground gnomes surrounding Heath all came forward and stared at the magical scene in front of them with wide eyes. However, before they could get rid of the magical scene in front of them, an even more unbelievable scene quickly shocked all the underground gnomes present. Rumble! Suddenly, a series of loud rumbling sounds sounded out, followed by a series of violent tremors from the ground. Then, large and thick bean vines could be seen breaking out from the soil, entangling with each other and growing up rapidly. They were like giant trees that suddenly rose from the ground. "Oh my God, they're growing, they're growing. Too fast, too fast. Big tree, it's a big tree. A big tree is growing." Amidst the cheers of the little people, bean vines grew rapidly on the ground, entangling with each other and twisting together, growing rapidly toward the ground. Soon, a huge tree was formed on the ground. The diameter of the tree was several meters thick. Even with Heath's body size, he would need several of him to circle around it. For the underground gnomes, they would need at least 20 to 30 of them. What a big tree! Isn't this amazing? It grew out in an instant. Look, there's fruit. What a big fruit! Tree house, it's a tree house. Right at this moment, a big fruit grew out of the tree. It was not an ordinary fruit, but a fruit in the shape of a house. There were windows and doors. Through the open window, one could even see the tables, chairs, benches, and even beds inside. It hung on the trunk of the tree, as if it was a meticulously built tree house. Clap, clap. After clapping his hands, Heath, who had finished casting, raised his head to look at his masterpiece, his eyes filled with satisfaction. This treehouse was called the Magic Hut, also known as the Bean Hut. As its name suggested, this was a structural spell created by wizards using magic and beans. The principle was to compress the originally built house into the beans using spatial magic. When used, wizards only needed to activate the beans, and the beans could grow the treehouse directly. It was very convenient. If it was not so, the wizard would need to use magic to create a small house. However, that was a very difficult thing to do. It required a very detailed operation to complete. It was far from what an ordinary wizard could do. Fireballs, frost, lightning, and even transformation spells. These seemingly magical operations were actually very crude spells. Their models were destined to not require much detailed structure. They could be thrown out and it would be done. However, things like houses were different. They themselves had very high requirements for details. Using magic to create them also had very high requirements for the use of spells. To use an analogy, fireballs, frost, and other spells were like bombs. There was no need to care about things like workmanship. As long as they were thrown out, they would explode. As for spells like houses, they were like clothes that people wore on their bodies and food that was eaten into the stomach. Not only did it have to be able to be eaten and worn, but it also had to be worn comfortably on the body. Eating was an outstanding feeling, and this was also the difficulty of such spells. When it came to spells that involved food, clothing, shelter, and travel, wizards would use magic to seal them in advance and take them out directly when they needed to use them. The cottage in front of them and even Heath's wizard ship were a typical example. If it was created purely by using elements, even a stigmata-level wizard would not be able to do it. It's been a long time since I've seen such a magical spell. At this moment, an old and calm voice came from afar. This voice sounded very different from the other underground gnomes. In particular, it seemed to contain an indescribable penetrative force, as if it was artificially infused with spirit. Heath could not help but raise his eyebrows and look in the direction of the voice, only to see an underground gnome walking over. His appearance was no different from the other underground gnomes here. They were all the size of delicate dolls. He looked to be about 60 or 70 years old, and his appearance was very old. His long white beard that was almost dragging to the ground at the chin was very eye-catching. This old underground gnome was wearing a tattered old robe. He held a long cane in his hand and there was a beast bone tied to the end of the cane. He held the cane and walked towards Heath step by step. Everyone seemed to respect him. After the old man came, everyone, including Elder Albert, who had led Heath, turned to look at the old man and bowed. Shaman! Shaman Kurza! Shaman! Hearing the other underground gnomes address him, Heath could not help but look at the old man, his eyes filled with curiosity. Heath had read about the shaman of the underground gnomes in a book. He was almost like a wizard in the human world, born with a very magical ability. Like wizards, they could sense elements and even cast some spells. However, unlike wizards, whose power came from the exploration and learning of knowledge, a shaman's power was more like an innate talent. They did not need to read a lot of books and accumulate knowledge like wizards did. Instead, they only needed to cultivate their power and grow. After that, all kinds of spells would be awakened in their souls and consciousness, and they would naturally be able to comprehend them. It was just like how cats did not need to be taught to climb trees, and dogs did not need to learn to track scent. They were born with the ability to do so. The shaman walked over and gave Heath a greeting that he did not quite understand. Then, he laughed and said, "Respected wizard, welcome to the Ashud tribe. I am the shaman Kurza here. It is a pleasure to meet you." Heath said politely, "Oh. Hello, I am Heath Noen, a wizard from the Old Land." The shaman said, "The Old Land? That is a title that only exists in the West. So you are a wizard from the Tower of Order." Heath was very surprised. "Do you know about the Tower of Order?" Kurza said with a smile, "He, it is not only the wizards from your world who will come down. Occasionally, people from our underground world will go up, especially those young people who have the spirit of adventure and want to see the world. Many of them have gone up to see the outside world, just like me 200 years ago." Heath suddenly understood. "I see." Meeting a shaman who knew the situation of the surface world made Heath feel a lot more friendly. He immediately wanted to invite Kurza to the hut to drink tea. He could also learn some things about the underground world through Kurza. Unfortunately, Kurza rejected Heath's invitation. The reason was that it was almost night. He needed to guard the tribe at night to guard against nightmares that might invade. On the way here, he had heard Al and Rose mention the word nightmare more than once. Now, he heard Kurza mention it again. Moreover, Heath clearly saw that when Kurza mentioned the nightmare, the faces of the other underground gnomes around them could not help but turn pale. They looked very afraid. Heath asked, "Forgive me for being presumptuous, but the nightmare that you mentioned refers to..." The surroundings fell silent for a moment. Kurza also fell silent for a moment before explaining, "That's the terror that exists in this forest. They appear every night, and all us underground gnomes here are afraid of them." Pausing for a moment, he turned his head to look at the sky. Then, he said, "It's about time now. Those nightmares will come out soon. If you want to know, you can follow our soldiers to the entrance of the camp later. How about it? Are you interested?" Heath thought for a moment and said, I see. All right then. He was still interested in this so-called nightmare. Maybe it was something that could be extracted, right? After chatting, Heath went back to his cabin to rest. Although he didn't know what that nightmare was, it didn't look like an easy target. He might be in a hurry later. It was better to make some preparations in advance, at least to adjust his body to its best condition. Thus, after returning to his room, Heath ate some simple food and entered his spiritual sea to engage in deep meditation. Deep meditation was an ability that could only be obtained after advancing to an intermediate wizard. Before becoming an intermediate wizard, a wizard's meditation required a large amount of spiritual power, so there was a strict limit to the time they could practice every day. Once the wizard's mental energy was exhausted, continuing to meditate would put the wizard at risk of having their mental energy collapse. After advancing to an intermediate wizard, a wizard could begin deep meditation. Unlike ordinary meditation, deep meditation did not consume mental energy, but instead could recover mental energy. It was also the main way for a wizard to recover mental energy in the later stages. Otherwise, for wizards who would have a huge amount of spiritual power later on, it was not enough to just rely on rest and sleep to recover spiritual power. Perhaps a single meditation would take days or even months to recover their power. Entering deep meditation, Heath recuperated for more than half an hour and then took a spiritual water. Soon, the little spiritual power that he had lost was fully recovered. At this time, a horn sounded outside. Woo! 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 Heath pushed open the door and went outside. At this time, the whole camp was busy. Underground gnomes were running around inside and gathering at the entrance of the camp. Before Heath went back to his room to meditate, Albert had left 2 underground gnomes to guard the door of Heath's room. When they saw Heath coming out, the 2 underground gnomes quickly came to welcome him. Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard! Heath nodded slightly and then cut to the point. It's messy here. What's going on? Is it that so-called nightmare? The 2 underground gnomes nodded. With a serious expression, he said, Yes, sir. We just received news that a nightmare has appeared in the forest. It's only a short distance from our camp. The elders told us to be on guard and ready to defend the camp at any time. I don't know why, but the nightmares seem to be getting stronger and stronger. It's hard to guarantee that we won't be hurt just by relying on the magic array left by Wizard Ashut, an underground gnome said worriedly. Heath glanced in the direction of the camp's entrance and said, I'll go and take a look. Along the way to the entrance of the camp, there were already many underground gnomes gathered here. They wore simple rattan armor and held stone axes and stone spears made of stone and sticks in their hands. The civilization of the underground gnomes was not very high. They were still in the Stone Age, and most of the tribes used stone weapons as their main weapons. A sharp-eyed underground gnome saw Heath coming over and quickly shouted, Sir Wizard is here. Hearing his shout, the other underground gnomes quickly turned around to look at Heath. Everyone's faces were more or less happy. After all, everyone knew how powerful wizards were. Not to mention other things, the underground gnomes had already witnessed the mysterious and powerful magic in the morning. Now that such a powerful figure had appeared here, it was of course a great help to them in fighting the nightmare. Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard, you're here! Sir Wizard, you're here to help us fight the nightmare, right? Everyone gathered around and looked at Heath expectantly. Looking at the pairs of expectant eyes, Heath was also embarrassed. He could not help but cough and change the topic. Cough, I came to take a look first. He was just curious about what this nightmare was and wanted to study it. As for fighting the nightmare, it was not the main reason for him to appear here. Of course, if it was convenient and not too troublesome, he did not mind helping these underground gnomes solve their problems. Sir Wizard! At this moment, an old voice sounded, and he saw Shaman Kurza walking towards him with a long cane. Chapter 382. Sir Wizard! An old voice sounded, and then Shaman Kurza walked over with his walking stick. Shaman! Heath saluted. Kurza put on a smile. It's nice to see you here. Your arrival has given us more confidence in defeating the nightmare. This is really good news for us. They hadn't even started and he was already trying to pin the responsibility on him. Heath was speechless in his heart. He nodded and said, If there is a need, I will do my best to bring help to you. Since he had already said so much, Heath felt that it was inappropriate for him not to make a statement. Anyway, that was it for now. If it wasn't something troublesome, he wouldn't mind helping out, and if it was something particularly troublesome and powerful, then it would be meaningless for him to help out. Shaman Kurza nodded. I'm relieved to hear that from you, Sir Wizard. Da-da-da. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. Not long after, he saw an underground gnome running towards them in a hurry. When he came close, he said in a panic, Shaman, Shaman, the nightmare is coming, the nightmare is coming. When they heard this, the faces of the underground gnomes around them could not help but turn pale. The atmosphere seemed to become heavy all of a sudden, and the shaman next to them also changed the smile he had before. The brows on his forehead were tightly knitted. He said in a low voice, I know. After a pause, he turned to Heath and said, Sir Wizard, let's go there quickly. Heath followed the shaman, Kurza, to the front of the main gate of the camp. Under the protection of the underground gnomes, he walked to the gate of the camp, and in front of him was a lush forest. Under the cover of the night, this lush forest was quiet. There seemed to be some black shadows flashing through the dense bushes. The night wind blew, and the treetops swayed. Long shadows were dragged out on the ground. Their shapes were ferocious and twisted. Together, they made the place look eerie. The only camp on the hillside that was flickering with fire now looked like a sheltered island in the middle of a violent storm, causing people to hold their breath. Hoo! Hoo! At this moment, the sound of the wind suddenly became stronger. At the same time, an unpleasant and strange sound was heard. It sounded like the sound of a leaking throat being torn. It reminded Heath of the wailing undead on the bloody battlefield. As the sound was heard, the forest in front of them shook even more violently. Not long after, a strange creature walked out from the forest. It was a humanoid creature. It had 2 feet on the ground, 2 hands on its body, and a head on the top of its head. However, it only looked like a human. In fact, its appearance had nothing to do with a human. There was something that looked like a head on its head, but no facial features could be seen on its face. There were only 4 tiny holes in the middle, like a 4-point sieve. Its body was a puddle of mud-like material, and some unknown material was still flowing down its body as it walked. It was nauseating. Nightmare, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare, it's a nightmare. This thing that did not seem to have much combat power seemed to have brought great psychological pressure to the underground gnomes. When they saw it appear outside the forest, the underground gnomes immediately became nervous. All kinds of panicked voices sounded one after another. Hwalala! Before the underground gnomes could shake off the fear in front of them, the treetops shook again, and then human figures walked out from the bushes. Just like the disgusting creature in front, the ones that came out from behind also had round heads, 4 points of facial features, and 4 limbs that were like mud. They were also nightmares. 1, 2, 5, 8. Heath counted. There were a total of 8 nightmares that came out from the bushes. They spread out in a semicircle and surrounded the exit of the camp. 8. 8. Oh my god, 8 nightmares. There are 8 nightmares. The underground gnomes that were already panicking were even more afraid now. Gasps and panicky voices quickly spread among the underground gnomes. The defensive line, which had been barely maintained, was immediately thrown into chaos. Even the shaman Kurza's expression turned ugly. He frowned. There are actually 8 nightmares this time. Heath raised his eyebrows and asked in puzzlement, 8 nightmares? Is that a lot? Kurza nodded. He said worriedly, yes, normally there will only be 1 or 2, not more than 5. I really didn't expect there to be 8 this time. Could it be because they noticed that the magic array left by Wizard Ashud had problems? On the way here, Heath had heard Al introduce the magic array to him. It was the magic array that the wizard who had brought the underground gnomes here had set up for the underground gnomes. It was used to help the underground gnomes settle down here. Roar! At this moment, an intense roar was heard. Following that, the 8 nightmares suddenly released an aura, as if they wanted to launch an attack here. Heath narrowed his eyes, trying his best to feel the aura released by these nightmares, trying to identify the strength of these nightmares. But for some reason, he could not sense any aura through his spiritual power. These nightmares seemed to be very weak. They even gave him the same feeling as an ant on the side of the road. They're going to attack. They're going to attack. The underground gnomes that were already in chaos became even more panicked. Some of the underground gnomes in the front row could not help but start to retreat. Seeing that the defense line of the underground gnomes was about to collapse before the battle began, Albert, as the leader, quickly performed his duty and stood out to give orders. "Damn it, all of you stand properly. Don't panic, don't panic. With the shaman, Sir Wizard, and the magic array left by the wizard to protect us, we will win. We will win." Albert's roar was very effective. After hearing his shout, the underground gnomes turned their heads to look at Heath and Shaman Kurza. Seeing the two of them standing calmly in front of them without any sign of cowardice, the originally chaotic underground gnomes gradually quieted down. "Yes, with the shaman, with Sir Wizard, with magic, we will be protected. In front of magic, even a nightmare is nothing. Don't be afraid." Roar. At this moment, another roar was heard. Along with this roar, the 8 nightmares that were originally standing suddenly rushed up the hill and attacked the camp of the underground gnomes. "They're here. 500 meters. 300 meters. 200 meters. 100 meters. What fast speed!" Heath was slightly surprised. These unknown creatures that did not seem to have much combat strength launched an attack that greatly exceeded Heath's expectations. Their speed was extremely fast. It could be said that their speed was no less than his usual running speed. After all, he was a Grand Knight who was known for his speed. In an instant, these monsters had already appeared around 100 meters away from the camp and arrived near the stone wall. Just as the monster was about to rush up the hill, the stone wall at the bottom of the hill suddenly lit up with a beam of light. The air twisted, a transparent force field spread out from the air and formed a transparent wall of light. Boom! 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 The 8 nightmares hit the wall of light one after another. The wall of light trembled and a loud boom was heard. It stopped. It stopped. The underground gnomes heaved a sigh of relief. Heath raised his eyebrows and his gaze fell on the light walls. This is... He could feel the dense positive energy particles on the light walls. The light element was very abundant. It was obvious that this was a magic array with the light element as the core of the positive energy element. The light element was a moderate element. Its compatibility could only be said to be average among the many elemental spells. However, this element had an excellent effect in resisting the dark elements. It had an excellent counter against the dark element. And because of this, the light element was usually used to set up a defensive magic array against the dark element. So, these nightmares are monsters with the dark element as the main negative energy. Heath could not help but guess. Roar. A violent roar sounded again. The nightmares did not stop after being stopped by the wall of light. Instead, they began to attack the wall of light. Their attacks were very monotonous and purely physical. They raised their long arms and clenched them into fists, punching the wall of light one after another. In an instant, a deafening rumble rang out, and the wall of light shook continuously. Ripples appeared one after another on the surface of the wall, as if it was a lake that had been stirred up. Crack! Under the intense attack of the nightmares, a soft and clear sound suddenly rang out. Immediately after, a tiny crack appeared on the wall of light, as if it was a crack that had appeared on a glass mirror. The expressions of the underground gnomes present changed at the same time. Before they could react, the crack grew rapidly and spread to the entire wall of light in an instant. Then, with a clang sound, the wall of light exploded like a broken mirror. The broken light spots scattered everywhere. The defensive spell has been broken. The defensive spell has been broken. The underground gnomes were shocked. Albert, the leader of the underground gnomes, also looked terrible, but he quickly raised the stone axe in his hand and shouted, "Calm down, my clansmen, excellent underground gnomes, follow me. Sir Wizard is with us. Sir Wizard is with us." With that, he led a group of underground gnomes and charged forward. At the same time, the surrounding stone walls flickered with dazzling beams of light, and magic arrays appeared beneath the underground gnomes' feet. From the patterns of these magic arrays, it could be seen that they were all beneficial spells. After the beams of light flashed, Heath could feel that the physique of each underground gnome had increased. The wizards are with us. Under the cover of these magic arrays, the aura of the underground gnomes had also increased greatly. It was as if they had forgotten their fear in an instant. They roared and rushed towards the nightmares, and quickly collided with them. Pang! 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 Pu! 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 These nightmares were about 3 to 4 meters tall. Even for a normal-sized human like Heath, they were tall. To the underground gnomes, they were like giants. The underground gnomes raised their stone axes and stone spears in their hands and continuously attacked the nightmares' ankles. When these stone axes hit the nightmare's ankles, a series of pu sounds could be heard. For a moment, only a large amount of rotten mud-like substances could be seen flying in all directions. It looked extremely disgusting. However, when the underground gnomes attacked, the nightmare monsters also began to retaliate against the underground gnomes. Their attacks were still very monotonous. They were purely physical attacks, but their effects were very outstanding. The deterrence effect was even stronger, because they were completely eating the underground gnomes. Yes, they stretched out their long arms and casually grabbed the underground gnomes on the ground and stuffed them into their heads. Initially, Heath thought that these monsters did not have mouths, but when the underground gnomes approached their faces, the faces of these monsters would not automatically crack open into a long crack. It was filled with rows of sharp teeth. The nightmare opened its big mouth that was filled with sharp teeth and put the underground gnomes in. Then, with a few crunching sounds, it chewed the underground gnomes into pieces and swallowed them into its stomach. Crack! 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 At that moment, one after another, the underground gnomes were sent into nightmares' mouths. These nightmares acted like they were eating at a buffet. With both hands, they grabbed the underground gnomes on the ground one after another and stuffed them into their mouths. In front of these giant creatures, the underground gnomes had no chance to resist at all. Seeing the underground gnomes being eaten one by one, Shaman Kurza could not sit still. His face suddenly darkened. These damn things! As he said that, he raised his long cane and chanted a strange spell. Heath felt a surge of spiritual power start to be released from Kurza's body. Obviously, the shaman was about to cast a spell. For a moment, Heath could not help but focus his attention on Kurza. He had never seen a shaman's spell before. What would it look like? Chapter 383. What was a shaman's spell like? With this question in mind, Heath focused his attention on Shaman Kurza. Kurza stumbled forward, raised his long hands, and began to chant a long incantation. Heath was slightly stunned when he heard the incantation. According to his knowledge, wizards should be the only ones who needed to chant spells, because incantation was essentially a special syllable that could communicate with the elements. This syllable would collide with mind power when it was uttered, which would affect the effect of the elements to mobilize the elements. The research that wizards had been doing for generations was to understand the meaning of each syllable and how these syllables could be combined to produce a better effect and produce more energy. In other words, spells should be a kind of encapsulation of knowledge, a manifestation of knowledge. As for other creatures such as demonized creatures, high-level magical elves, and even high-level magical beasts, most of these creatures used innate talents when they cast spells. It was equivalent to them having organs that could cast spells, so they did not need knowledge or research. Since they did not even need knowledge, they naturally did not need spells. However, the shaman was now chanting, which surprised Heath. This syllable sounds like. It doesn't seem like a regular syllable, but it does sound like something from ancient times. The surging spiritual power field is also like this. Touching his chin, Heath began to ponder. At the same time, as Kurza chanted, with him as the center, a surging spiritual power field was released, and the surrounding force field instantly began to surge. Rumble! A violent rumble sounded. Scorching flames suddenly bloomed from Kurza's body and rapidly rose to a height of more than 10 meters, quickly transforming into a huge fire snake in the air. What dense fire elements! Seeing this fire snake, Heath could not help but be shocked. He could sense an extremely strong fire element from this fire snake. It was an element that far exceeded the strength of ordinary flames. It was as if a ball of already dense fire element had been compressed repeatedly before this kind of energy had long emerged. Heath could even smell a trace of the power of rules within this. This fire, Heath frowned. He did not expect this little underground gnome to be able to mobilize so much energy. Was this a talent? Or was it a kind of spell knowledge that he did not know? At the same time, the battle ahead was still ongoing. After the fire snake had completely solidified, Kurza raised the long cane in his hand high and swung it at a nightmare in front of him. Whoosh! The fire snake swung its long tail and pounced at the nightmare. It was extremely fast and appeared in front of the nightmare in an instant. It opened its mouth with long fangs, swallowing the nightmare in one gulp. Rumble! There was a loud sound. The nightmare turned red, hot, and began to melt bit by bit under the fierce burning of the flames. It completely turned into hot lava. Shaman! 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 The underground gnomes, who had just been panicking because of the massacre of the nightmares, immediately regained their original morale. Everyone shouted the name of the shaman and attacked the nightmare. The situation on the battlefield seemed to have stabilized again at this moment. On Kurzaw's side, after eliminating the first nightmare, he immediately struck while the iron was hot. He waved his cane and controlled the fire snake to continue pouncing on the second nightmare. Although these nightmares looked extremely powerful, they did not seem to be very intelligent. They did not retreat when faced with the powerful fire snake. Instead, they waved their fists and fought with the fire snake. Undeniably, whether it was in terms of strength or speed, these nightmares were not to be underestimated. However, they were clearly weaker when compared to this fire snake. When the fire snake swept over, the second nightmare was quickly buried under the fire snake's attack and melted into a puddle of fire. Following that was the third, the fourth. Under the attack of this powerful fire snake, in the blink of an eye, 4 nightmares fell to the ground. However, the fire snake's attack ended here. After the third nightmare was melted, the power of the fire snake was obviously not as strong as before. Its originally solid body also looked a little illusory, as if it had become transparent. When it was fighting with the fourth nightmare, the fire snake was a little powerless. Its body was even hit by the attacks of the nightmare, leaving holes everywhere. Although the fourth nightmare was melted in the end, it was obviously very difficult. After the fourth nightmare fell, the fire snake itself became riddled with holes. Seeing this, Kurzaw did not immediately continue to attack. Instead, he controlled the fire snake to form a circle on the same spot as if he was resting. Kurzaw himself began to pant one after another. The sweat on his forehead was also rising. However, they were all evaporated by the blazing heat. Clearly, the damage of this spell was terrifying. It was also a great burden for Kurzaw. Kurzaw wanted to rest for a while before fighting again. However, the current situation did not go according to his wishes. Roar! 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 Roars sounded one after another. They were the remaining nightmares. They did not give the fire snake a chance to catch its breath. After their companions fell, the remaining nightmares rushed towards the fire snake and quickly fought with it. After the first few rounds of attacks, the fire snake was already at the end of its tether. How could it withstand the attacks of the remaining nightmares? When the nightmares surrounded it, a loud rumbling sound could be heard. The fire snake's body exploded one hole after another, and the entire fire snake shook violently. Seeing that the fire snake was heavily injured, Kurzaw's expression changed drastically. He hurriedly waved his staff in an attempt to pull the fire snake away from the onslaught of the nightmares. However, the fire snake's movement speed was only a notch higher than these nightmares. Now that it was injured and surrounded, how could it break free so easily? Even though Kurzaw had already tried his best to mobilize the fire snake to escape, it was once again caught up by the nightmares not long after it escaped. Following that, another round of brutal encirclement ensued. And after this round of encirclement, the fire snake, who had long reached its limit, could no longer hold on and exploded into a ball of flames with a boom. The moment the fire snake exploded, Kurzaw's face turned pale as if he had suffered the same serious injury. He opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. His body swayed heavily, as if he could fall at any moment. Shaman! Shaman! The expressions of the underground gnomes changed drastically, and a few of them rushed up to support Kurzaw. Is this a spiritual connection? At the moment when the fire snake exploded, Heath clearly felt that the spiritual energy field between the fire snake and Kurzaw was vibrating at the same level. It was as if a marionette was suddenly cut short from the middle. Roar! An intense roar sounded, like the elegy from the region and the death knell from the top of the tower. It made the underground gnomes terrified. After losing the fire snake, these nightmares no longer had any obstacles. Ordinary underground gnomes were no match for them at all. Their little bit of damage was not even worth mentioning to the nightmares. The nightmares were like walking into a cafeteria. Each of them had an underground gnome in each hand. They grabbed them and stuffed them into their mouths, followed by the sound of ka. Pu. One by one, the underground gnomes exploded in a nightmare's mouth. Seeing their companions being chewed into pieces and swallowed by the monster's mouth with their own eyes, to be honest, this scene had a huge impact on the underground gnomes, especially when they saw their companions being crushed into pieces. Some of the underground gnomes even began to tremble as they held their weapons. Hold on! Don't retreat, don't retreat! The shaman will support us soon. The magic array can be reactivated soon. We will win. Albert brandished his stone axe and shouted as loudly as he could in an attempt to stabilize the morale of the army. However, his shouts were of limited use at this time. After all, no matter how much chicken soup was poured into their hearts, if they could not defeat the monster before them, they could not defeat it. No matter how loud Albert's shouts were, he could not avoid the terrifying impact of his companions being eaten and chewed into pieces. Seeing that the underground gnomes were beginning to lose, Kurza could not help but become anxious. He tried his best to prop himself up as if he wanted to do something. However, after the collapse of the fire snake, his spiritual power seemed to have been damaged, and his magic power was exhausted. He could not do anything for a while. After trying a few times but still failed to wave his staff, he could only look at Heath anxiously. "Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard! Please help us, please help us!" Heath did not waste any time and immediately pulled out the red demon greatsword. Although it was a bit shameful for these underground gnomes to put on a high hat for him, he still had to live here for a period of time, after all, not to mention that he still needed the underground gnomes to guide him. In addition to this, he was also curious about what this nightmare was. Now that he had the opportunity, of course, he had to study it carefully. Clang! A loud sword chime rang out. Heath brandished his red demon greatsword and charged straight towards a nightmare in front of him. The red beam of light from the great sword was like a red ribbon dancing in the air. With both hands holding red demon, Heath's entire body was like a bolt of lightning as he charged straight towards a nearby nightmare. This nightmare was currently slaughtering its way through the underground gnomes. It was completely unprepared against Heath's sudden attack that was fast and ruthless. Moreover, it was in a state where its back was facing Heath. It was even more impossible for it to react. However, just as Heath's great sword was about to slash at its body, this nightmare seemed to have eyes on its back. It suddenly turned around with a movement so fast that it was almost impossible to see clearly. It raised its palm and grabbed Heath's greatsword. Clang! The sound of metal colliding with each other like a gong sounded. Heath's powerful sword slashed at the nightmare's palm, but it did not even break the other party's palm. Instead, it was blocked by Heath's two hands. What a strong physique! Although he had already discovered that these seemingly mud-like nightmares actually had an extraordinary physique when he was watching the battle, it was still out of Heath's expectations when they really exchanged blows. His sword just now had basically used the power of the pinnacle of his night level. Even a city wall could not withstand his sword. However, at this moment, it was firmly held by the nightmare's hands. Other than being abnormal, Heath could not find any other words to describe this monster. Who? Before Heath could accept the reality before him, suddenly, a strong sound of wind breaking could be heard. The nightmare in front of him suddenly turned into an afterimage. At the same time, one of its legs fiercely swung towards Heath. The movement of that leg caused the speed that was already at its peak to increase greatly. It was so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. Heath's heart tightened. He quickly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already 5 meters away. At the same time that he disappeared, he could vaguely see that there was a leg that swung past where he was standing just now. As that leg swung past, there was a tearing sound, and the air seemed to be torn apart from within. Numerous tiny spatial cracks were revealed. One could imagine what would have happened if Heath had been standing there just now. What fast speed! Even Heath, who was growing faster, could not help but exclaim at the speed of the nightmare. It could tear apart the spatial cracks with its speed. This speed was no longer something that could be described as simply fast. Who? Before Heath could react, that cold whistling sound once again sounded. Having encountered the previous encounter, just hearing this sound caused Heath's heart to tighten, and his entire person hurriedly became 120% focused. At the same time, a blurry figure instantly appeared in front of Heath. It was the nightmare that had just swept across him with its side leg. Similarly, the nightmare that appeared in front of Heath immediately attacked him. The monster suddenly raised its two long arms and clenched them into a fist. It smashed down towards Heath's face. Just in time. Faced with this powerful attack, Heath was not afraid. He immediately raised the red demon greatsword in his hand and slashed down. It was as if he wanted to engage in a head-on clash with the monster. It was purely a contest of strength. Boom! A deafening sound rang out once again, like a clap of thunder in the sky. At the instant that the monster's fist collided, Heath immediately felt an unprecedentedly powerful force sweep over him. In an instant, the shock caused his palm to go numb, and the red demon greatsword in his hand almost fell out of his hand. Chapter 384. Heath instantly felt a huge force coming from his palm, and it swept towards his body at an extremely fast speed. For a moment, Heath only felt his entire body shake violently. It was as if he had been heavily hit by a high-speed carriage. Boom! A deafening sound rang out. Heath's entire body flew backward heavily. Behind him was a row of crisscrossed trees. Every tree was at least as thick and sturdy as a treant. However, at this moment, Heath only heard a series of caw-caw explosions as the trees were broken one by one. Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard! The underground gnomes' expressions changed greatly. Albert hurriedly rushed over with a few underground gnomes. The original forest had been completely turned into ruins at this moment. The broken trees were scattered everywhere. Large patches of branches and leaves collapsed, and the entire ground was covered with a thick layer of dust. Cough! A light cough sounded. A figure slowly stood up from the dust. Bright silver metal wrapped around his entire body. The mercury-like material was now covered with scattered small stones, broken wood, and various other materials. It was as if he had just been hit by a violent storm. The best thing was that although these broken stones were deeply embedded, they could not penetrate the mercury shield. Of course, they could not harm the inverted figure protected under the shield. Seeing that Heath was safe and sound, the underground gnomes who had rushed over heaved a sigh of relief. Albert quickly asked, "Sir Wizard, are you all right?" Heath waved at him casually. "I'm fine." He looked at the nightmare in front of him with a gloomy expression. Although he had predicted that the power of this thing would not be too low, the result of this collision was still far beyond Heath's expectations. One had to know that he had been a Grand Knight for many years now. During these years, he had not forgotten to increase his strength. With the help of magic and the system, his strength had increased steadily. Until now, he had reached an extremely high level of strength. At this level of strength, even if it was against an intermediate to advanced level demonized beast that was known for its strength, Heath had a certain degree of confidence that he would have the upper hand no matter how weak he was. However, he had been easily defeated by this monster. This was really beyond Heath's expectations. Interesting. After a short period of staring at it, the corners of Heath's mouth could not help but curl up. Although he had suffered a loss against this thing had also aroused Heath's desire to fight. Fighting against powerful creatures and constantly surpassing oneself, this was the purpose of a knight holding a sword. Clang! A loud sword chime exploded. Heath raised the red demon greatsword with both hands again. At the same time, the nightmare seemed to have sensed something. The four green bean-like organs locked onto Heath's body. Heath raised his eyebrows. So this thing has a mind. I thought it was just a pure malicious substance. He felt that he was getting more and more interested in this thing. Roar! The nightmare roared and charged at Heath with all his limbs once again. At the same time, Heath held the red demon greatsword tightly and charged straight at the nightmare. In the blink of an eye, the two huge forces collided heavily once again. Boom! That thunderous boom once again exploded in the forest. This time, Heath, who was prepared in advance, was not blasted out by the nightmare again. Instead, he was in a stalemate in the air. As the two of them collided, with the two of them at the center, the air distorted and a surge of gas exploded like a cloud bomb exploding on the ground. The shockwave spread out in the surroundings at an extremely fast speed. Bang! 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 A series of muffled sounds rang out. Wherever the gas passed, trees flew, and even the soil and gravel on the ground were lifted up. The entire ground was destroyed in an instant. What? What terrifying damage is this? Is this the power of a wizard? It's too terrifying. The underground gnomes were stunned. This level of power was completely beyond the imagination of weak creatures like them. Just a single attack had destroyed the entire forest. It was truly terrifying. Roar! 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 A fierce roar sounded. The other nightmares that were spread all over the surroundings turned their heads and locked onto Heath. The powerful momentum caused by the fight between the two had attracted the attention of the monsters. They had realized that Heath was not the same as the underground gnomes. Communication? Is it a group battle consciousness? Heath noticed that after the monsters locked their eyes on it, they seemed to be whispering to each other. Heath could even feel a faint spiritual fluctuation from them. This spiritual fluctuation. For some reason, Heath felt that this spiritual fluctuation seemed somewhat familiar. It should be very similar to a certain creature that he knew, but exactly what kind of creature, for a moment, Heath was unable to identify it. Forget it, I'll just bring them back and dissect them for experiments. Having made up his mind, Heath once again attacked these nightmares with the red demon greatsword in his hand. Through the previous exchange, Heath had basically figured out the strength of these monsters. Their abilities were mainly focused on the physical aspect. They had abnormal strength and constitution, and extraordinary speed. With these abilities, they could withstand most of the damage. They could also possess destructive power and strong speed that could not be captured by the eyes. But in the end, they were only physical-type creatures. They couldn't use ever-changing magic. This was their weakness. Immediately, Heath activated his spirit net to attack these monsters. He thought that he could easily destroy them, but reality disappointed him. When his spirit net swept over, these monsters were unexpectedly protected by a spirit shield. As a result, when Heath's spiritual network hit them, it met resistance. Although Heath quickly broke through the spiritual protection of the monsters, when he once again activated his spiritual power in an attempt to destroy the consciousness of these monsters, he was stunned again. This was because at this time, he realized that the spiritual sea of these monsters was already a paste-like substance. To use a pictographic analogy, he was finally able to pry open the enemy's skull and was prepared to destroy the enemy's brain. However, when he opened the skull, he was surprised to find that the brain in the head was already in tatters. What the hell is this thing? Heath was a little speechless. It must be known that no matter what kind of creature was in this world, as long as it was able to act on its own and had its own consciousness, it would definitely have a complete spiritual sea and its own spiritual force field. However, the monster in front of Heath did not have a spiritual force field at all. To be exact, its spiritual sea was actually paste. This situation had clearly exceeded Heath's original understanding of things. I must dissect them and take a look. The curiosity in Heath's heart flourished. The battle continued. Since the spiritual force direction could not destroy these monsters, Heath could only return to the original physical level. Although the physical attributes of these monsters were exaggerated to a crazy degree, in the face of magic, these physical attributes were still too weak. Under the premise that Heath did not cast any magic, these monsters could still rely on their physical attributes to fight with Heath. It could even be said that they could firmly suppress Heath. However, when Heath began to cast spells, they were not enough. The first to be pushed up by Heath was his signature skill, Indestructible. He had used fire magic to launch the first attack because he had just seen Shaman Kurza's attack on the nightmares. Kurza had also used a fire spell at that time, and this fire spell had directly destroyed 3 nightmares. Although the first reason was that the powerful fire spell Kurza had cast had the power of rules, Heath guessed that the fire spell had a certain restraining factor on these nightmares. This was also an important reason. His guess was quickly confirmed. When Heath's indestructible attack was aimed at the first nightmare, the scorching flames immediately engulfed the nightmare's entire body. The mud-like substances were burned by the flames and made a sizzling sound. It quickly melted and disappeared in the flames. Roar! In the meantime, the nightmares that were unwilling to die just like that roared again and again. They immediately surrounded and attacked Heath with a few companions. They seemed to be able to determine that Heath was the source of the flames on their bodies. They could even tell that after destroying Heath, they would be able to dispel the flames on their bodies. However, Heath obviously would not let them have their way. Before the nightmares surrounded him, he immediately cast Extreme Speed on himself. This was an official level support spell. Its purpose was to give himself a powerful speed buff. After the extreme speed buff, Heath's already outstanding speed had once again increased by another level. His movements were as if he had teleported. Even if he casually dodged, he would be able to leave after images in the air. This speed was already far beyond the Nightmare's level. Previously, Nightmare's speed was only slightly faster than his, and was even on par with him. Now, once Heath's speed increased, it was impossible for them to catch him. Even though Nightmares had already used all of their strength to quickly surround and annihilate Heath, every time they charged over, Heath would turn into an afterimage and dodge to another place. After gaining the advantage in speed, Heath did not fight these Nightmares head-on anymore. In any case, he only wanted to test the strength of these things before he continued to fight them. Now that he knew what he needed to know, there was no need to waste his energy fighting them. Zi zi, zi zi. The crisp sizzling sound continued. Unable to chase Heath, these monsters were doomed and could only continue to accept the eternal burning. The nightmare's body of the mud was burned by Heath bit by bit. This situation did not last long. After about a few minutes, a burning nightmare could not hold on any longer. With a rumble, it fell to the ground, completely turned into a clump of debris. Roar! Roar! The death of their companion infuriated the remaining nightmares. A few mud balls suddenly rose up from the bodies of the nightmares and exploded. Then, their speed increased by a large margin. They were almost catching up with Heath's speed. What is this? Magic? Why is there no spiritual fluctuation? Heath was extremely surprised. The speed of the nightmares that was so weak just a moment ago suddenly increased was beyond his expectations. What he did not understand was why these nightmares did not release any elemental fluctuation or spiritual fluctuation before they accelerated. Could this not be magic? With this doubt in his heart, Heath continued to dodge methodically. See. Although the nightmare's speed had suddenly increased by a large margin, it was still slower than Heath's speed by more than a level. With the boost from the speed buff, it was basically impossible for them to catch up to Heath. Although they could not catch up to Heath, they could still maintain a short distance from him, which made the following battle very troublesome for Heath. After all, other than his innate spell Indestructible, which could be cast freely without any hindrance, the rest of his spells required him to chant incantations and runic gestures. In other words, he needed to create a sufficient distance between him and the nightmares to cast spells. Currently, this distance was far from enough for him to cast a complete spell. After casting the spell, Indestructible entered the stage of mental paralysis. During the mental paralysis stage, he was unable to cast the spell again. Could it be that he could only hide here and there with a dirty look on his face? Although he could still win this way, it was obviously not in line with Heath's style. Therefore, after dodging for a moment, he once again brandished the red demon greatsword and secretly activated the magic in his body. With his body full of magic power, Heath slashed his sword forward. Sword wind. Hoo! Hoo! The sound of rushing wind could be heard. This rule-type spell that Heath was used to was once again used. With the help of the combination of rules and sword techniques, thousands of wind blades were summoned in the air. Under the guidance of the red demon greatsword, the densely packed wind blades pounced towards the leading nightmare. For a moment, it was as if a violent storm had been set off in the air. Pu! 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 A series of crisp pu! Pu! Sounds rang out. The wind blades that filled the sky tore open one wound after another on Nightmare's body. In the face of such a dense attack, even a monstrous defense like Nightmare's could not withstand it at all. In an instant, it was torn into pieces. Chapter 385. Sword Wind. Along with the strong sound of wind breaking, thousands of wind blades swept towards the Nightmare in front of them. In the face of such a powerful attack, the Nightmare could not withstand it at all. All of a sudden, the sound of wind breaking could be heard. The mud-like body of the Nightmare was immediately torn apart bit by bit in the face of such a powerful attack. In a moment, it was completely turned into a pile of rotten meat. Wizard! Wizard! Magic! Magic! Earth-shattering cheers rang out. When the underground gnomes saw that Heath had destroyed one nightmare after another, they immediately cheered. Roar! In contrast to this, the remaining nightmares immediately became angry. They let out furious roars and charged towards Heath with their limbs. Just in time. Facing the terrifying nightmares, Heath did not show any signs of cowardice. He raised the red demon greatsword in his hand and slashed forward once again. Sword Wind. The same terrifying wind blade appeared once again and slashed forward with a vigorous momentum. Sword Wind was not an ordinary spell. It was a rule-based spell created by Heath according to the rules of magic and combined with his own swordsmanship. The model of this type of spell was directly imprinted on Heath's soul. It was a bit like an innate spell. There was no need to chant spells, no need to use runic gestures, and it could be cast with just a thought. Moreover, unlike ordinary spells that would only be able to be used again after a period of mental paralysis, this spell that was imprinted on the soul had no requirements for mental paralysis. As long as a wizard had magic power, they could cast it at will. The only thing that limited it was the wizard's own magic power, and this was also the strength of rule-type spells. Puff! 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 A series of crisp sounds rang out, and the sword wind in the sky instantly swept up the two nightmares at the front. Although the number of nightmares doubled, they were still unable to withstand the terrifying damage in front of the powerful sword wind. As if they had entered a meat grinder, both of them were torn into pieces. Another 2 killed. Great, another 2 killed. Too powerful, the wizard is too powerful. When the underground gnomes saw the nightmares falling one after another, they immediately cheered loudly. Their originally dejected expressions were swept away, and the morale of the entire underground gnomes tribe rose by a large margin. Seeing this, Albert, who was leading the team, immediately raised the stone axe in his hand and shouted, "Everyone, come with me and support Sir Wizard. Everyone, work together and kill the remaining nightmares. Support Sir Wizard and get rid of the remaining nightmares. Support Sir Wizard and get rid of the remaining nightmares." At this moment, the underground gnomes were in high morale. When they heard Albert's shout, they immediately responded in unison. Everyone immediately brandished their weapons and rushed towards the nightmares in front of them like a swarm of bees. Their momentum was like a rainbow. When Heath saw that he was not organized, he released a few spells consecutively. Among them, there were even 2 sword winds. As a result, he had used up a lot of his magic power. He even felt a little dispirited in his spiritual power. Although it would not be a big problem to continue fighting, since these underground gnomes were willing to help, wouldn't it be better to let them hold him back to recover his spiritual power? Don't fight them head on. Hold them back for a while. I'll rush over to support later. Yes. After giving instructions to the underground gnomes, Heath rested on the spot. At the same time, he opened his dimensional pocket and took out the spiritual water that he had prepared beforehand, and drank it. He had made ample preparations before this trip. One of the dimensional pockets was filled with spiritual water that could quickly recover magic power, in order to deal with such sudden situations. After paying for a mind potion, a pure stream of mental energy immediately flowed through Heath's limbs and bones into his spiritual sea, and the magic power that had disappeared quickly recovered. The dispirited state of his mind was swept away, and Heath quickly returned to his original state. Then, he did not delay any longer, and rushed forward with the red demon greatsword in his hand. ICV. After a series of battles, 3 of the 8 nightmares were killed by Shaman Kurzaw's magic, then another by Heath's, indestructible, and then 2 by sword wind. That was 6 nightmares in total. After the 6 nightmares fell, there were only 2 nightmares left on the battlefield. At this moment, the 2 nightmares were being besieged by the underground gnomes. Although there was a big gap between the combat strength of the underground gnomes and these monsters, it was fortunate that there were so many of them. When the numerous underground gnomes formed a siege, the nightmares could no longer kill in all directions like before. Instead, it seemed as if they were being suppressed by the underground gnomes. The nightmares that were already at a disadvantage became even more pressed once Heath entered the battlefield once again. Now that they had the absolute advantage, if Heath was willing, he could use his sword wind to crush the 2 nightmares in front of him into pieces at any time. However, he did not do so. This strange creature was a rare experimental material for Heath. Previously, he had killed those nightmares because he had to gain the upper hand, but now there were only 2 nightmares left. Without the pressure from before, of course, he could slowly deal with them. These 2 guys, Heath was prepared to take them back and dissect them. Let's get rid of one first. After thinking for a while, Heath brandished his red demon greatsword and charged forward, using his physical attacks to destroy one of the nightmares. However, this nightmare only had its head chopped off, and a large part of its corpse was left behind. It was not like before, where the corpse was torn into pieces. After killing this nightmare, there was only 1 nightmare left on the battlefield. At this moment, Heath did not continue to attack the nightmare. Instead, he took out a magic scroll from his dimensional pocket. He pulled open the magic scroll and threw it in the direction of the nightmare. Immediately, the scroll landed on the ground and immediately flashed with a dazzling green light. Rumble. A series of loud rumbling sounds rang out. The ground on the ground cracked open one after another. Vines broke out from the ground and quickly swept towards the nightmare in front of them. Crash! The nightmare, who was fighting with the underground gnomes, did not notice the sweeping attack at all. Before it could react, the vines had already wrapped around its body. Roar! Roar! The nightmare opened its mouth and let out a roar. At the same time, it forcefully opened its mouth, trying to break free from the vines. These vines were actually not thick. The thickest ones were only as thick as a thumb. Some of them were even similar to ordinary hemp thread, making it seem as if they could be easily torn apart. However, the strange thing was that no matter how hard the nightmare tried, it was still unable to break free. This vine seemed to have an extremely strong willfulness. This was, Binding Vine, a plant-type spell that was specially used for control. The tenacity of this vine was one of the highest among all the vine-type plants. Even a Grand Knight could be easily bound by it. Although these nightmares were much stronger than Grand Knights in terms of strength, they were still far from being able to break free of the vines. Haha, we won, we won. The nightmares have been defeated, the nightmares have been defeated by us. The underground gnomes cheered, and the gloominess on their faces was completely swept away. Every face of the underground gnomes was filled with an uncontrollable smile. Kill it! Everyone, come on, let's go and kill this nightmare. After a short cheer, they began to attack the last nightmare under Albert's command. At this time, the nightmare had been bound by Heath's magic and could not move. If the underground gnomes surrounded it, it would definitely die. However, at this time, Heath stopped their attack. All right, everyone, stop. The underground gnomes were stunned. They did not understand what Heath meant. The nightmare was finally forced into a desperate situation by them. If they did not take the opportunity to destroy it, then it would break free. To the underground gnomes, who knew how many more lives they would have to pay, Albert hurried to say, Sir Wizard, now is the time. If we don't get rid of this nightmare, when it breaks free of its shackles, we will be in big trouble. Everyone's physical strength had reached its limit, and they were still holding on purely based on their morale. If this nightmare wasn't destroyed and instead returned, they wouldn't be able to muster the slightest bit of strength to resist. At that time, they would be completely at the mercy of the nightmare and wouldn't be able to resist at all. The shaman, Kurza, also hurried over. The old man's voice was anxious as he advised, Sir Wizard, Albert is right. Hurry up and get rid of this nightmare. Otherwise, if it breaks free of the vines, we will all lose our lives. Based on Shaman Kurza's understanding of magic, no magic was eternal. Although the nightmare seemed to be tightly bound by the vines, no one could guarantee how long the vines would be able to hold it. If it broke free, the entire Ashut tribe would suffer as well. The previous rounds of battles would all be for naught, and the dead tribesmen would also die in vain. Seeing that everyone was questioning his actions, Heath knew that he would definitely give an explanation no matter what. He smiled. He explained, Please don't worry, Shaman. The vine that binds this monster is called the Binding Vine. It's made by us wizards with special magic. Once it's bound, even a Grand Knight won't be able to shake it off. Although this monster's strength is indeed out of the ordinary, it's still far from breaking free from the Binding Vine. It's impossible for it to break free. The Binding Vine was forged by a wizard using multiple vines and some extremely viscous magic. Other than being afraid of flames, it basically had no flaws. The battle just now with this so-called nightmare had fully demonstrated that they were all pure physical monsters. It was impossible for it to escape. This. After listening to Heath's explanation, Shaman Kurza's worried expression eased a little, but that was all. He still couldn't be at ease when facing this terrifying monster. He couldn't help but ask Heath, But Sir Wizard, why aren't you destroying this nightmare and tying it up? Heath didn't hide anything and immediately explained, I want to bring it back and study it. I want to find out where this thing's power comes from. When he had just fought with these nightmares, Heath had felt extremely strange. These things clearly had very strong power, but why could his spiritual power not detect their power at all? Other than that, their biological composition did not seem to be similar to any demonized creature that Heath knew. This made Heath very curious. Since there was a chance to study a living body, he naturally could not miss it. That was why he had tied up this nightmare. Research. Shaman Kurza widened his eyes. The other underground gnomes also looked at Heath in disbelief, as if they were looking at some kind of monster. The power of the underground gnomes came from their own growth. In their eyes, power was something that they would naturally possess when they were born. They would not think about where the power came from. Not to mention researching this kind of monster. In their eyes, this kind of monster was something that they could not avoid. How could they still study it? In their minds, there wasn't the word research. Heath nodded. Without avoiding it, he said, yes, for a wizard, understanding the principles of things is the meaning of a wizard's existence. Any wizard standing here would not miss such a strange thing. This, the shaman frowned. The other underground gnomes also started whispering the wizard wants to study that nightmare. Did I hear wrong? This is too crazy, too crazy. That monster should be dealt with as soon as possible. Why would the wizard want to study it? This is not a good idea. Yeah, I think it's better to forget about it. Let's get rid of it quickly. If we let it escape, we'll be in big trouble. Heath frowned. He thought it would be a simple matter, but he did not expect these underground gnomes to care so much. However, Heath was not a person who would give up easily. If these underground gnomes still wanted to stop him here, then he could only do as he pleased. This nightmare was taken down by him. Since the monsters that the underground gnomes could not destroy with their entire clan's strength were easily destroyed by him, then they should know that they had no right to stop him. Silence. At this moment, a cold sneer sounded. Chapter 386. The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruit Heath said bluntly, the number of nightmares just now, I could defeat all of them. Now there's only one left. Even if it escapes, I wouldn't care. This. Forget it. Sir Wizard, although you're powerful, what if? The underground gnomes were still hesitant. After all, they had suffered a lot from the nightmares. They had lost too many people, and their fear of this thing was deeply engraved in their bones. It was not so easy for Heath to erase the mark in their hearts with just a few words. Seeing this, Heath could not help but say in a more serious tone, I caught this nightmare, and I have the right to deal with it. Now I want to keep it because it is crucial to my research. This is one of the reasons why I helped you. Pausing for a moment, he said in a more serious tone, all right, that's the end of the matter. There's no need to say any more. He had never intended to discuss this with these underground gnomes. From the start, they did not have a choice. After all, in this world, strength was still the number one rule. Here, Heath had absolute strength. He naturally had an absolute choice. Seeing that things had come to this, Albert also knew that they had no choice. Thus, he quickly stood up and said, we were able to obtain victory because of Sir Wizard's help. If it wasn't for the Sir Wizard, we would all have died here today. All right, now that Sir Wizard needs this nightmare to do magic research, we shouldn't stop him. Since Sir Wizard can defeat them one by one, even if there is an accident, he will definitely be able to defeat them again. That's it. Thus, the matter came to an end. No matter how unwilling the underground gnomes were, they had no right to speak here. Everything was decided by Heath. Then, the underground gnomes cleaned up the battlefield. The war of cleaning up the bodies of the dead and recuperating had come to an end. After the matter was over, the shaman came before Heath again. After the tough battle just now, the old man's face was obviously very pale, and his spiritual power was also quite weak. It was obvious that he had exhausted all his strength. At that time, he still insisted on walking to Heath. He bowed deeply and said, Sir Wizard, I am really grateful to you this time. Thanks to your help, our tribe was able to persevere through this dark time. Heath shook his head and said, it's okay. To me, this is just a piece of cake. Moreover, this nightmare is indeed a rare research material for me. The strength of a wizard was different from those underground gnomes. It came from the digging and research of knowledge. This shaman, Kurza, had heard of it before. Therefore, hearing Heath's words that were crazy in the eyes of the other underground gnomes, he could reluctantly accept it. He said, it's great to be able to bring help to Sir Wizard. If you need anything else, our tribe will not refuse if we can do it. After a pause, Shaman Kurza continued to ask, I heard from Al that Sir Wizard needs some guides to collect some materials in the forest. Is that so? Hearing the old man's words, Heath could not help but feel a little better. He nodded and said, yes, this is also the main reason why I came to the underground world. I came here mainly to collect some materials. Wizards often searched the world for all kinds of strange materials to make all kinds of strange potions. Kurza had heard of this a long time ago, so he was not curious about it at the moment. If it were any other underground gnomes, they would be surprised. After all, the forest full of nightmares was like hell to the underground gnomes. If it was not a last resort, they would never go into the forest. Shaman Kurza continued to ask, Sir Wizard, what materials do you need? Can you tell me? My tribe has some understanding of this generation's situation. Perhaps it can help you, Sir Wizard. Heath's eyes lit up. Because the underground world and the surface world were two different worlds, even wizards rarely had any understanding of the situation here. Naturally, it was difficult for Heath to learn about the knowledge here from books and information. Before coming here, he basically knew nothing about the situation here. After all, this Ashud tribe was born and raised here. Although they rarely went into the forest because of the nightmares, compared to Heath, who was an outsider, they definitely needed to know more about the situation. He quickly said, "If you can help me, it would be great." After a pause, he explained, "I came here for a material called the rebirth fruit. I wonder if you have heard of this material." The rebirth fruit? Shaman Kurzal looked surprised. Heath raised his eyebrows. "You know about it?" Kurzal smiled bitterly. "Sir Wizard, you really know how to find things. It's not easy to come to the underground world and ask for the rebirth fruit." Heath was stunned. "What do you mean?" From what he knew from the wizard's books, this rebirth fruit should be a kind of high-level magic material in the underground world. Although it was expensive, it did not say how difficult it was for him to obtain it. Seeing Kurzal's expression at this moment, Heath was somewhat puzzled. Kurzal opened his mouth to explain. "This rebirth fruit is one of the oldest kinds of fruits in our underground world. It is said that they were left behind during the Age of the Gods. It was planted by a god himself. In order to plant them, that god specially built a forest in the depths of the underground world to plant this fruit. In the ancient times, there were many such fruits. However, during the Battle of the Gods 10,000 years ago, that forest was also destroyed. During the war, it was basically destroyed. At this moment, only a few fruits are left. And because of the magic bombing, the forest is now filled with a very strong negative energy. To us underground people, it is an existence that is even more terrifying than a nightmare. Almost no one dares to approach it because it is too terrifying. Ghosts, strangeness, terror, pollution, all kinds of terror exist there. That forest is also known as the Forbidden Forest." When he said the words Forbidden Forest, Heath noticed that Kurzal's expression had obviously changed. He could not help but look pale, as if he was very afraid. Heath could not help but become even more curious. Even in the face of the dangerous situation of 8 nightmares and when the underground gnome race had almost been destroyed, Kurzal had not been so afraid. And now, it was as if an ordinary human had encountered a ghost, leaving only fear in his eyes. After a pause, Kurzal persuaded, "Sir Wizard, are you sure you must go to that forest? Are you sure you must have the rebirth fruit? If possible, I still hope you don't go to that place. After all, it's really not a good idea." Heath raised his eyebrows. "Then other than the Forbidden Forest, is there any other place that I can get the rebirth fruit?" Kurzal shook his head. "No, the rebirth fruit is a unique product of the Forbidden Forest. In the entire underground world, only that place can have it. There were wizards who tried to transplant this fruit to other places to plant it, but they all failed in the end. The gods seem to have used a very strange method to cultivate this fruit tree in the past. Other than that forest, no other place in the world can let those fruit trees survive." Heath said, "Is that so?" Kurzal nodded and said, "Yes, then Sir Wizard, do you still want to go now?" Heath thought for a moment and said, "I'll go and take a look first. If I really can't handle it, it's not too late to come back. Otherwise, it's hard to come down here and spend so much effort. I've already come here. It doesn't make sense to go back without doing anything, does it?" He didn't finish his sentence. After all, from Kurzal's description, that place didn't seem to be a good place to go. Heath decided to go and take a look first. If he couldn't handle it, he would give up and go another way. After all, there wasn't only one way to mediate the side effects, but the price of other ways was higher. Seeing that, Shaman Kurzal did not continue to persuade him. He nodded and said, "If that's the case, then it's fine. Sir Wizard, when do you plan to set off?" "I will arrange 2 clansmen to be your guides." Heath thought for a moment and said, "In a few days. I will study that nightmare first before going." If it was before, Heath would have decided to set off as soon as possible. In the beginning, he had planned to set off early the next morning, but now he had obtained a strange research material. Heath decided to put the matter of the materials aside for the time being and focus on the research at hand. After all, Heath was a wizard who was keen on researching all kinds of magic. For him, absorbing knowledge and exploring new things was always his first goal in life. He had to give in to everything else. Kurzal said, "Okay, then, sir, when you are about to set off, send someone to tell me." I will ask my clansmen to prepare the things you need on the way and lead the way for you. Heath said, Thank you, shaman. Seeing that the shaman was so easy to talk to, Heath could not help but have a good impression of him. Seeing that his spiritual power was so weak, Heath decisively took out a spiritual water and handed it to the shaman. Heath said, Shaman, this is a kind of magic potion that I concocted. Its name is spiritual water. It can recover spiritual power. I see that your spiritual power seems to be a little weak now. Please drink it and see if it can help you. Curzon was flattered. Ah, Sir Wizard, is this true? According to what he knew, wizard potions were extremely precious. They were priceless treasures. He did not expect Heath to be so generous as to give him a bottle of potion. Heath smiled and said, You're welcome. I still have a lot of this. I prepared a lot before coming here. To ordinary people, this may be a rare treasure, but to us wizards, it is just a daily item. It is not a valuable item. Spiritual water might be considered an expensive treasure to ordinary wizards, but it was really nothing to Heath. After all these years of research on potions. At this moment, he had reached an extremely terrifying level in potions. With the help of the system, he could quickly grasp any potion formula. With this large amount of knowledge. Now, it was as easy as flipping his hand to concoct a potion. He could easily concoct potions that were even more advanced than spiritual water. After Shaman Curzon thanked Heath once again, he drank the potion. As soon as the potion entered his mouth, a surge of spiritual power immediately flowed into his sea of consciousness. The originally exhausted spiritual power was instantly replenished, and Curzon's originally pale face instantly recovered a lot. He could not help but smack his mouth and sigh involuntarily, if we can have such a miracle, maybe we won't have to struggle so hard against the nightmares. Heath said, It doesn't matter. Before I successfully find the rebirth fruit and leave here, I will leave some for you. It's enough for you to use for a long time in the future. Shaman Curzon said in disbelief, Ah, Sir Wizard, is what you said true? This is not a joke, right? Heath smiled and said, As I said, this is indeed not a great treasure to me. Curzon did not know what to say for a moment. His gratitude towards Heath had reached its peak. Seeing that the old man was about to kneel down and kowtow, Heath quickly changed the topic. Ahem, let's not talk about this. Speaking of this, I have some questions about that nightmare that I would like to ask you. Curzon asked, The nightmare? What do you want to know, Sir Wizard? Heath asked, Do these nightmares often attack the camp? I saw that everyone looked very familiar with them before. It seems that this place is often attacked by them. Curzon sighed and said, Yes, since the day our tribe lived here, these nightmares have never stopped. They attack us all the time. We can barely survive by relying on the magic array. Since the day you lived here. Heath felt that something was strange, but he could not tell what was strange. He asked, Then have you ever thought of moving to another place? Curzon said, Do you mean to move? He smiled bitterly and said, How could we not have thought of it? We have tried it for generations, but we have all failed. Chapter 387. Our tribesmen have never given up on the idea of migrating. From the day we lived here, from the day the nightmares attacked the tribe. Over the past 200 years, we have initiated countless migrations, almost every few decades. The most recent migrations happened 10 years ago, and many of our tribesmen have experienced it. But no matter where we move, those nightmares will never let us go. Mountains, lakes, grasslands, they will find us anywhere and attack us. Without the help of the magic arrays, our tribesmen outside have no ability to resist them. Heath raised his eyebrows. They will find you every time? Is it always like this? Shaman Curzon nodded. Yes, every time. Hearing Curzon's description, Heath could not help but be puzzled. From Curzon's description, it seemed that these nightmares were specifically aimed at them, the underground gnome tribe. Thinking about it carefully, he had never heard of these nightmares attacking other creatures in the forest. Heath asked, Do these nightmares attack other animals before? Other creatures in the forest? Curzon thought for a while and said, Attack other creatures? I'm sorry, Sir Wizard. We don't know about this. After all, we never go out to look for the nightmares. But as far as I know, it shouldn't be. I've never heard of other creatures in the forest being attacked by the nightmares. Heath touched his chin. That's strange. He continued to ask, Then how often do the nightmares attack you? Curzon replied, we can't be sure at this time, Sir Wizard. Sometimes, we'll be attacked by them in 10 days or half a month, but sometimes, it won't come for months or even years. I remember the longest time was more than 2 years ago. At that time, our clansmen all thought that they had disappeared, but then they still appeared, and we suffered heavy losses because we weren't prepared. Is that so? Heath was puzzled. He continued to ask, I've heard before that the number of nightmares that attack you is always uncertain. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Is that true? Curzon nodded. Yes, the number of nightmares that attack us are not fixed, but usually there are only 2 or 3 of them. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to hold on for so many years. For example, this attack of 8 nightmares has never happened before. I don't know what happened. Heath was puzzled. Never? Then how many nightmares have attacked you before? Curzon thought for a moment and said, there were 6 nightmares before this, but that was 50 years ago. At that time, I was still a child. I still remember that nightmare vividly. Most of our clansmen died, including my father, and I became a shaman after that. Heath asked with a strange expression, 6 nightmares? How did you manage to block them? According to Heath's observation, these underground gnomes were very weak and were not much different from ordinary humans. Although this shaman Curzon seemed to be able to use some kind of magic that was comparable to the power of a rule-type spell, his energy was too small. Basically, he entered a weakened state after using that spell. The most up-to-date novels are published on Feeble. According to Heath, with their strength, they could deal with 1 or 2 nightmares. If they were forced to, they could only deal with 3 or 4 at most. Reaching 5 was already the limit. If there were more than 6, it would be impossible to block them. Heath even thought that 4 or 5 nightmares could completely slaughter them. Shaman Curzon said, I understand your surprise, Sir Wizard. In fact, I also thought that we were dead. The nightmares had already broken through the magic array, rushed into our camp, and began to slaughter our tribe. But please believe me, our tribe was much stronger than it is now. My father was also a shaman, but the power he could use was much stronger than mine. After a pause, he added, but we were still defeated at that time. The nightmares rushed in. But just as I and most of my clansmen thought that we were dead, something strange happened. After the massacre, the nightmares suddenly fell to the ground one by one. It was very sudden, as if they suddenly died. Their bodies melted and rotted, and we survived because of it. Heath was stunned. They suddenly fell. Curzon said with certainty, yes. At that time, they had already rushed into our camp and started to slaughter our comrades. I used to have 2 brothers, but now I'm alone. Those 2 brothers were sacrificed at that time. At that time, I thought that I, too, would return to the embrace of my ancestors. But at this critical moment, the nightmares fell. This matter is still fresh in my memory, and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. After a pause, Curzon continued, however, I heard from my elders that this is not the first time such a thing has happened. Heath asked in puzzlement, not the first time. Curzon nodded and said, yes, there have been a few times when our tribesmen were unable to resist the nightmares, and when the nightmares invaded the tribe, those few times were also when our tribe was on the brink of death. Heath was surprised and said, could it be that the nightmares fell at the critical moment every time? Curzon nodded and said, yes, Sir Wizard. I heard the elders talking about it. The reason why we were able to defeat the nightmares was because the nightmares fell by themselves in the end. Heath rubbed his chin suspiciously. Every once in a while, they would launch an attack on the underground gnomes tribe. No matter where the underground gnomes escaped to, they would chase them relentlessly until they were destroyed. However, if they really could not resist and let them attack, would they fall to the ground and die before the underground gnomes were annihilated? What kind of logic is this? Heath could not figure it out for a while. He had a feeling that this thing was strange. Seeing that Heath's expression was a little strange, Curzon could not help but ask, is there a problem, Sir Wizard? Heath thought for a moment and finally shook his head. It's nothing. I'm just curious about these nightmares. He still did not understand anything. He would first go back and dissect the nightmare to see what was going on. Perhaps after an experiment, he would be able to find the answer. Even if it could not be done in one go, at least there would be more clues. Curzon said, okay. If Sir Wizard has anything else you want to know, you can find someone to ask me at any time. As long as I know something, I will tell you. Heath nodded. Okay. After saying goodbye to Curzon, Heath returned to his cabin. After a busy night, it was indeed time for him to have a good rest. He first put in a pool of hot water. The magic cabin looked like an ordinary wooden cabin from the outside, but in fact, the interior was embedded with multiple layers of spatial magic. With the support of multi-circulation spatial magic, the actual use of the internal space was determined by the wizard's own financial resources and strength. If the financial resources were enough to bear the materials and their own strength was strong enough, it could even be magnified to an unimaginable degree. For example, the magic cabin that Heath used was embedded with 6 spatial magic arrays. In order to create 6 rooms, they were the bedroom, bathroom, living room, bathroom, laboratory, and meditation room. The bathroom was built by Heath according to the royal palaces of the secular world and the bathroom in a luxurious manner. The entire bathroom was as wide as a basketball court. Half of the central area was dug into a pool by Heath, which was equivalent to a swimming pool. In the pool, Heath had also carefully set up a magic array. Take the water in the pool as an example. The water was created by a complex water magic array. This magic array could create water when Heath needed it. Of course, the wizard world followed the conservation of energy. Even wizards could not create water out of thin air. This pool of water cost 1 magic stone. However, to the current Heath, a magic stone was nothing. It was no different from a copper coin in the eyes of a king. Every time he took a bath, he would exchange it for water. Heath felt that it was worth it. In addition, Heath had set up a fire magic array on the magic array below. The use of this magic array was self-evident. It was used to heat Heath's water. Other than that, it could maintain the temperature that Heath wanted at all times. The price was higher than the previous water magic array. It required 2 magic stones to use at one time, but similarly, in front of a king, 1 copper coin was no different from 2 copper coins. It was the same for Heath. 1 magic stone and 2 magic stones were just a drop in the bucket. Splash! The clear sound of flowing water could be heard. Heath walked into the pool. Then, he clapped his hands lightly, making a clear patter sound. Accompanied by his applause, the pool water in the pool suddenly rolled up one after another water tornadoes. These water tornadoes quickly transformed into graceful girls in the air. These transparent, light blue girls were very suitable for the sentence that women were all made of water. They were pure water girls. Splash! The formed maidens did not say a word. They walked towards Heath and surrounded him. Then, they took out a towel or simply stretched out their hands to rub Heath's back and bathe him. Yes, these maidens were also from a magic array that Heath had set up in advance. The name of this magic array was called the Water Maidens, and its function was just like this. It could summon a few girls that were completely formed from water elements to assist him. Of course, this spell was modified by Heath. Its original form was actually water element summoning, which was a common battle spell used by water wizards. It could summon water elements to assist them in battle. According to the template of this spell, Heath added a part of the model of the activation spell on it. In the end, the water element that could only be used for battle was transformed into a servant that could give him a bath and massage his back. However, using the appearance of the water element as a servant was really too strange, so Heath spent a lot of effort on the appearance of the water element later on, transforming them into the image of a maid. Thus, the current spell was formed. Lying comfortably by the side of the pool, Heath let the water-shaped girls stretch his muscles and bones for him. Then, he took out some exquisite food from his dimensional pocket. Using magic, he let them float on the surface of the water and surround himself. While enjoying the bathing of the girls, he ate delicious food and drank fine wine. This feeling was really comfortable. The tiredness from the battle seemed to have been swept away in an instant. Yay! Your life is quite comfortable, isn't it? At this moment, a teasing voice sounded. Then, a grayish-brown fog rose from the ring on Heath's finger. Soon, Nina, who was wearing a red dress, flew out from the fog. She sat on the surface of the water, swaying her long and fair legs. She picked up a red heart fruit that was floating in front of Heath and began to eat it. While eating, she couldn't help but tease, "Don't you only know how to immerse yourself in cultivation? Since when did you know how to enjoy life?" What Nina said was the truth. In Heath's daily life, he basically practiced, experimented, read books, practiced swordsmanship, and practiced. The cycle repeated itself, like a circular machine that would not stop. He basically never went out to participate in entertainment or do some things to enjoy life. It was even rarer for him to relax like this. Heath replied casually, "It's nothing. I'm just tired and want to rest for a while." In fact, Nina was overthinking it. Heath usually portrayed himself as an ascetic, but that did not mean that he had masochism. Usually, ascetic training was simply because he could find pleasure in ascetic training. Whether it was training, reading, or experimenting, when he was doing these activities and obtaining strength, knowledge, and success from these activities, his heart would become abnormally excited, and the fatigue that was originally caused by boredom would be swept away. He enjoyed that feeling very much, which was why he constantly indulged in these projects. Over time, to outsiders, Heath was like a magic madman who did not live in the mortal world and only knew magic. In fact, Heath knew how to enjoy life very well. In the past, when he was on Earth, he would not mistreat himself. Now that he had magic, which was a more convenient item, of course, he knew how to use them rationally to help his life. Of course, he would not say these words to Nina. In the face of Nina's teasing, he did not continue the topic, but asked in return, "What's wrong? Why are you awake?" Chapter 388. Not long after entering the underground world, Nina went back to sleep. During this period of time, she was always like this. She slept intermittently and spent most of the day in a state of sleep, and there were very few times when she was awake. Nina picked up the fruit and took a bite. Then she said, "Mm. After a beauty sleep, I feel much better now." Heath said, "You woke up at the right time. I'm going to conduct a magic experiment in a while, so you can help me." Nina pursed her lips and muttered, "Please, can't you find me for something else? Besides experiments, there are also experiments. It's so annoying." Heath couldn't help but be startled when he heard Nina's complaint. "Is that so? What do you think?" Nina said disdainfully. "Isn't it? Think about it carefully. Don't you always ask me to do experiments or do that for you? Seriously, I'm not your servant." Heath thought about it carefully, and it seemed to be true. In fact, he didn't deliberately use Nina as a tool. It was just that he had a lot of things to do, and he didn't have any fixed people by his side. He could rely on Amy when he was in the lighthouse, but Nina was by his side most of the time. Of course, he had to rely on her. Seeing that she looked like she had been wronged, Heath smiled. He comforted her, "Well, don't complain like a resentful woman. When we're done here, I'll take you to the underworld and show you around. It's rare to come here, so we can go where you want to. Go." Hearing Heath's words, Nina's face finally turned from worry to joy. She laughed and said, "Then you can't go back on your word." Heath said, "It's my motto in life to keep my word." After soaking in the pool for more than an hour, Heath got up. It was worth mentioning that the water in the pool was not ordinary water. At the bottom of the pool, Heath placed another spiritual recovery gem. When this gem came into contact with the water, it would release a special energy to change the elemental structure of the water. At this time, wizards who soaked in the water would be able to obtain a certain degree of spirit recovery. Although he had consumed a lot of spirit energy in the previous battle, Heath had already consumed a spiritual water potion to recover more than half of his spirit energy. Now, after soaking in the pool for more than an hour, his spiritual power had completely recovered to its full state. Following that, Heath did not delay any further. Instead, he brought Nina to the laboratory and began the experiment on the dissection of the nightmare. "It's so disgusting. Where did you get this thing? It's so creepy and sticky. Your experiment material is too disgusting." When Heath placed Nightmare's body on the experiment table, Nina was immediately shocked by it. The image of the nightmare was indeed one of the more disgusting types of experiment materials. Heath said, "You were sleeping just now, so I didn't disturb you. There was a battle in the evening. I left behind these things in the battle. Now, I just want to find out what they are." Nina waved her hand in disgust. All right. You're a magic lunatic. I'm impressed." After placing the nightmare's physical body on the experimental table, Heath first performed an extraction. He pressed one hand on the nightmare's chest and silently chanted in his heart, "Extract." Unfortunately, the structure of the extraction was disappointing. Beep, extraction failed. Extraction failed? Heath could be said to have been mentally prepared for this result, and it was not too surprising. Up until now, the extraction could only be extraordinary matter or living matter that had just died. The number of attributes extracted mainly depended on the degree of preservation of the extract, the level of the extract itself, and so on. And when he fought with this nightmare previously, Heath had felt that this nightmare was somewhat strange. It could not be defined by ordinary extraordinary matter. They did not even feel like living matter to Heath. This was because Heath could not feel the spiritual power of living substances from their bodies. Since this was not a living substance, and it was not an ordinary extraordinary substance, then there would definitely be problems during the extraction. The extraction failed. Heath was not discouraged and began the next task. Prepare a dissecting knife for me. Yes. Nina handed over a small purple knife. Its shape was similar to the scalpel on Earth. This was a dissecting knife used by wizards to perform body modification spells and to dissect living substances. The experimental materials that wizards needed to dissect were all strange. Many of the experimental materials were extremely hard, such as tortoise shells, scales, and so on. Some of them had skin defenses that were no weaker than steel or even higher level hard materials. It was impossible for an ordinary knife to cut through the skin of these materials. It was precisely because of this that wizards specially made this kind of dissecting knife. It was refined and processed from a metal material called star brilliance metal ore. This material had extremely strong toughness, and at the same time, it had outstanding magical conductivity. After a lot of tempering, they could be forged into incomparably sharp blades. After that, the wizards would arrange magic runes on the edges of the blades, allowing the ordinary knife to have extraordinary sharpness. It could cut through almost any material that existed in the world. Gulp. 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 After the skin was cut open, a yellowish-brown viscous liquid began to flow out. It looked like pus that was squeezed into the depths of the skin. The nightmare's body that was already disgusting was even more disgusting when paired with this thing. Nina simply cried out, "Oh my God, what exactly is this thing?" Heath said, "It should be blood." During the previous battle, Heath had noticed that this kind of liquid would flow out of the monster after it was injured. Although its appearance had changed greatly, Heath felt that it should be a substance like the blood of living creatures. After a pause, he continued, "Give me a sample tube and prepare a section for microscopic observation." Okay. Nina handed over 2 glass test tubes. Heath opened his wizard's force field and put the monster's blood cells, which were the yellowish-brown liquid, into the test tubes. He then instructed Nina to bring over a few glass cards. After that, he sliced off a part of the nightmare's body cells and put it into the glass cards, then handed it back to Nina for microscopic observation. Nina took the glass cards to a corner of the experimental table. There was an instrument similar to a microscope placed there. Wizards would also conduct microscopic investigations when they were learning things. This kind of microscope was one of the main instruments they used to conduct microscopic investigations. It was the same situation as a microscope. This kind of thing could also see the movements of matter at the microscopic level. The difference was that this kind of instrument was actually not a tool in a strict sense. This was because it was made from the organs of some creatures. For example, there was an eyeball at the bottom of the tube-shaped observation mirror of this microscope. That eyeball came from a kind of abyss-type creature called the demon-eyed monster. This kind of creature belonged to the category of undead creatures. Even if the organ left the main body, it could still survive for a long time. According to this characteristic, the wizards took the demon-eyed monster's eyeball and made it into a microscope. This was used as a microscopic phenomenon because the demon-eyed monster had a unique talent. It could see through the outer layer of matter and go straight to the microscopic layer. Heath asked, "How is it? What's the observation result? Are the numbers out? If they are out, report to me." "They came out, but why does it feel strange? Are you sure that this is blood and not some random wastewater?" Heath raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" Nina said, "The blood flow factor is only 18. I remember that even the blood factor extracted from earthworms shouldn't be lower than 3 digits. In addition, the floating value is pitifully low, only 2.8, which is 8% lower than the normal value. Other than that..." Nina reported the data to Heath one by one. Hearing Nina's report, Heath could not help but frown. Just as Nina said, this thing did not look like blood, or even like the liquid excreted by any normal creature, but rather like some kind of wastewater. Almost none of the items on blood were right. What is it? With this doubt in mind, Heath continued his experiment. Magic experiments were like this. In experiments, there would always be all kinds of strange problems, and the greatest value of many experiments was to solve these strange problems. Every time a problem was solved, it meant a gain for the wizard themselves. It meant that they would grow in turn, and their knowledge would progress. Heath then sampled the skin cells, bone fragments, and other parts of the nightmare, trying to recognize familiar life sequences and figure out what this thing was. This part was not easy. The life sequence of a creature was almost equivalent to the genetic code of a creature. It was the information hidden in the deepest part of the core of a creature's cell. It was impossible to extract it by ordinary means. It required constant screening to extract piece after piece of information from the blood, bone fragments, skin, and other parts of the body. Then, the complete life sequence could be pieced together. This was not something that could be done just by having enough experience. It also required a lot of time. Take the blood as an example. Just like the blood cell section just now, there was only a small piece of information. Heath still needed to do the blood cell section that he was not familiar with before he could piece together the complete blood cell life series. After that, the bone fragments, skin, and so on were all the same. After he had pieced them all together, finally, he could piece together the entire life sequence of a creature. Very soon, it was late at night. Yawn. Nina stretched lazily and could not help but yawn. She rubbed her eyes wearily. Heath, who was in front of the experiment table, could not help but raise his eyebrows. Why? Are you sleepy? I yawn. Nina said matter-of-factly, please, the two of us have been standing here in a daze for a few hours doing experiments. If it were a normal person, they would feel sleepy, okay? Heath teased half-jokingly, I still think that ghosts won't be sleepy. Nina rolled her eyes. Don't compare me to ordinary ghosts. Besides, you know that sleep is the greatest pleasure for me. Heath said, well. Since you're sleepy, then go and rest first. Hearing the word rest, Nina was obviously energized. Doing magic experiments was the most boring. She was already impatient after staying here for a few hours. It would be great if she could be liberated now. But after thinking about it, she felt that it was not very good to leave just like that. After all, she had personally promised Heath that she would help. So she asked tentatively, is this really good? I mean, if I'm not here, can your experiment continue? Of course it can continue, right? You're a genius, aren't you? Heath laughed and said, if you want to slack off, go ahead. I won't say anything. Pausing for a moment, he explained in detail, this experiment cannot be completed in a day or two. Let's call it a day. We'll talk about the rest tomorrow. Nina was so happy that she wanted to cheer, but Heath said, from now on, we'll do 2 experiments every day. Let's set the time in the afternoon. There's nothing to do during this time, so we can use it reasonably. Nina's mouth twitched, and she was speechless. No way, genius. Do you have to work so hard? Heath said strangely, it's only 2 hours a day. It's not too much, right? Nina tilted her mouth. Of course not, but it depends on how you compare it. If it were you, you would have been completely wrapped in magic all day long. Now, the only time you have to take a break for afternoon tea is to do experiments. I see that you've been focusing on magic every day. How can you have any fun in life like this? Heath was stunned. When he thought about it carefully, what Nina said seemed to be the truth. Previously, he still had to practice swordsmanship to polish his life during the long period of magic training, which made his life not seem so monotonous. However, ever since his swordsmanship had entered a bottleneck, he had not been able to break through. Recently, Heath had less time to practice swordsmanship, and he spent all the extra time on magic training. Although his strength had improved rapidly, it had to be said that this kind of life was too monotonous. Basically, Heath did not have much fun in life. He was like a standard training machine. It was better when he was in Golden Harbor Town. After all, there were students, townsfolk, and Amy. Occasionally, Heath would go out for a walk. However, ever since he came out on the way, Heath was either practicing or going to practice. It was really monotonous. But it couldn't be helped. After all. Heath smiled. Magic is the greatest joy of my life. Chapter 389. A few days later, in the underground world, in the nightmare forest. Boom! Boom! A violent explosion sounded in the forest, and the ground shook as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. Large patches of trees that had been blown to pieces flew everywhere. In the forest, a giant spider that was 5 to 6 meters tall was rampaging. Its forelimbs were like sharp blades, and under the swing of the giant spider, all the trees that it passed by were chopped into pieces. It looked like it was full of anger. Heath, who was wearing a black cloak, was running in front of the giant spider. He looked like he was trying to avoid the pursuit. His eyes would occasionally sweep behind him to observe the movements of the giant spider and dodge its attacks in time. A translucent figure was flying beside him. She said unhappily, "Seriously, why did you provoke this guy? Tarot spider. This is a giant with the strength of an advanced wizard. You are crazy." Heath had been staying in the underground gnomes tribe for the past few days. He was conducting experiments while entering the forest to extract materials from the surroundings. This giant spider was unfortunately provoked this morning. At that time, Heath was chasing a grey-tailed hyena. When he chased into a dense forest, he drew his bow and shot. At that time, he did not pay much attention to the situation in the forest. Who knew that there was a tarot spider living in this forest? One could imagine the consequences of Heath's arrow. Although the grey-tailed hyena was killed, it also angered the tarot spider. The giant creature immediately rushed out of its nest and launched a series of indiscriminate bombardments on Heath. It was as if it wanted to smash Heath into ashes. Nas. This giant spider was called the tarot spider. It was a demonized creature that was equivalent to an advanced level wizard. Although Heath's strength had improved greatly recently, he was still quite a distance away from an advanced level wizard. For a moment, he could not help but be flustered by this giant creature. At first, Heath wanted to try and see if he could kill it directly. However, after casting a few spells consecutively, only Swordwind and Indestructible could deal a small amount of damage. Even this small amount of damage was quickly recovered in front of the tarot spider's amazing recovery ability. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons for a while, Heath decided to make the first move as a sign of respect. The difference in strength was too big. Even if he won, he would suffer heavy losses. It was not worth it to fight for a meaningless battle. Heath frowned. "Let's not talk nonsense now. Quickly think of a way to get rid of this thing." It had been more than an hour since this thing had chased after them, but the monster had no intention of stopping. It had been chasing after Heath for more than an hour. It looked like it would not give up until it had a purpose. Although Heath was full of energy and could run for a few days and nights or even longer, it was not a good idea. After all, it was very uncomfortable to be chased by such a thing. After a pause, Heath said, "Fly up and see if there is a lake or something like that." Nina was puzzled. "Lake? What are you doing?" Heath said, "Didn't your teacher teach you? Tarot spiders hate water, and they don't have the ability to swim. As long as we enter the lake, it won't continue chasing." Nina said, There's such a characteristic? Are you sure?" Heath said with certainty, "I'm sure." "Don't talk nonsense. Quickly go and take a look." Tarot spiders were land-based demonized creatures. Their attributes were darkness and fire. They were not familiar with water, so they would not usually go to places with water. It could be seen from their nests that they were built in the depths of a dark forest. The nests were not built by a bright lake. "All right. Our add latest chapters at freeognovlo only." Nina agreed and quickly flew to the top of Heath's head. Nina's range of movement was affected by both the ring and Heath. Her soul imprint was branded on the ring, so her range of movement was limited to a certain range of the ring. At the beginning, the distance was 500 meters, but with the increase of Heath's spiritual power and the recovery of Nina's own spiritual power, this distance had been increased several times. Now, she could easily travel within 2 kilometers. Soon, Nina flew down and brought good news to Heath. "There are 2 lakes in the southeast, one on the left, one on the right, and one on the northwest. Which one do you want to go to?" Heath asked, "Which one is the closest?" Nina said, "In terms of distance, the one on the northwest is the farthest, and the one on the southeast is the one on the left. It should be less than 10 miles from here. What do you think?" "This is it." There was nothing to say. Now was not the time to be picky. Whichever lake was the closest would be the best choice. After making up his mind, Heath immediately rushed towards the lake Nina mentioned. At the same time he turned, the tarot spider behind him also followed suit. Although this thing was extremely large, its flexibility was not bad at all. At the instant it turned, it did not forget to attack Heath. It opened its huge mouth, and an incomparably thick and huge beam of light shot out from its mouth. This was the tarot spider's usual attack method, the disintegration ray. As its name suggested, the main function of this spell was to disintegrate. Everything that was hit by the light instantly melted bit by bit like a grey candle. Regardless of whether it was the ground or the trees, a hollow area appeared in the forest in the blink of an eye. It was as if this circle had been forcefully dug out by something. In front of the extremely fast light, Heath was in no hurry to avoid it. At the critical moment, the mimicry shield automatically appeared to help Heath block the attack. However, even the mimicry shield was unable to withstand the was about to burn through the entire mimicry shield. Seeing this scene, Heath could not help but exclaim, "Tisk tisk, what a powerful attack!" His mimicry shield was no longer the same apprentice-level spell as before. Over the years, Heath had put in a lot of effort towards this strongest defensive spell of his, adding most of the knowledge he had learned into it. After continuously modifying it, especially after advancing to an intermediate wizard, Heath had improved it in all aspects, allowing its defensive capabilities to reach the level of an intermediate wizard. The current mimicry shield had already moved the peak of the intermediate wizard level. In theory, even an all-out attack from an advanced wizard could be blocked. However, at this moment, it was on the verge of collapsing in front of this monster's attack. It was truly beyond Heath's expectations. Higgs looked back and praised, as expected of a demonized creature of the advanced level. Its power is indeed not to be underestimated. Nina frowned. Hey, hey, hey. I say, enough is enough, all right? We are running for our lives right now, yet you still have the mood to think about such nonsense? Please. Heath grinned. What's there to be afraid of? It can't catch up to us anyway. The tarot spider was not slow, but it was still quite a distance away from Heath. Even if it tried its best, it could only make itself stick to Heath. Of course. Heath also could not shake off the monster. After all, the tarot spider's speed was not too fast, but its endurance was extraordinary. It could also track scent and traces, etc. Even if he suddenly increased his speed and managed to shake off the monster, he would still be tracked by the tarot spider later on. One of them chased while the other escaped. Soon, they arrived at the lake that Nina mentioned. It was an extremely spacious lake. It looked like it was about 10 miles long. Its shape was oval like a pancake. It was quietly placed in the middle of the forest. It was no different from most of the lakes in this world. When he came to the lake, Heath did not say anything. With a leap, he dived into the lake. Then, his body rose and fell in the water a few times. Immediately, like a swordfish, he flew hundreds of meters away. Over the years, he had lived in Golden Harbor Town. Thanks to his unique geographical advantage, Heath would go back to the sea for a swim whenever he had nothing to do. In addition, several expeditions had involved underwater operations. Because of this, he had trained his excellent swimming ability. At this time, the value of knowledge was revealed. Just as Heath had analyzed, after the tarot spider came near the lake, the monster that had been chasing after them finally stopped. It stood on the edge of the lake and kept sliding a few slender legs. It looked like it wanted to rush down, but it seemed to be very hesitant. Seeing that he was in the water, Heath could not help but raise his eyebrows. He activated his magic to form a layer of ice on the surface of the water. Then, he climbed onto this layer of ice to let himself stand on the lake. Then, he began to provoke the tarot spider on the shore. He took out an arrow from his dimensional pocket and shot a few arrows at the tarot spider. Then, he activated his magic to release a few fireballs at the tarot spider. The inside of his mouth was even more arrogant as he began to provoke the tarot spider. Hey, big guy, aren't you good at this? Come on. Why aren't you chasing after me? Trash, is that all you can do? A beast is indeed a beast. The tarot spider was a half-intelligent demonized creature. It would definitely be able to understand Heath's language. Even if it could not completely understand the meaning of human language, it would definitely be able to recognize the provocation inside. Looking at the tarot spider's subsequent reaction, it could be seen that after Heath's series of suicidal actions, the tarot spider suddenly became furious. It opened its mouth wide and shot out over a dozen disintegrating rays into the lake. This caused a large amount of water to splash on the lake surface. Trash, you can't even use your attacks. If you're not trash, then what are you? Come on, bring it on. Come and kill me. However, in the face of this terrifying attack, Heath still acted as if nothing had happened. He continued to provoke the tarot spider, as if he wanted to seek death. Beside him, Nina's mouth was wide open. She said in disbelief, "Hey, are you crazy? We managed to shake it off with great difficulty, and you're still looking for trouble? Aren't you afraid that it will really charge over? When that time comes, we'll be in big trouble." Unexpectedly, Heath still did not repent after hearing Nina's words. He said, "That would be the best." Nina was cold. The best. She turned her head to look at the enraged tarot spider on the shore, then looked at Heath, who was still jumping around to provoke the tarot spider. She seemed to suddenly understand something. She said in surprise, "Could it be that you did it on purpose? You provoked it on purpose." Nina was right. Heath had done it on purpose. He wanted to lure the tarot spider into the water for a battle. Heath had never slaughtered a demonized creature at the level of an advanced level wizard. If he had the chance to kill one, it would be the best. Moreover, how many attributes could a demonized creature at the level of an advanced level wizard extract with the system? Just thinking about it made people envious, not to mention the huge value of a demonized creature at the level of an advanced level wizard. Demonized creatures at this level were really full of treasures. Any advanced level demonized creature could easily be sold at the market for millions or even tens of millions of magic stones. With so many benefits, it was impossible for Heath not to be greedy. If he was on the shore, he was certainly not a match for the tarot spider. Unless he risked his life and used all means to fight to the death, there was only a small chance of winning. Such a battle was definitely not worth it. However, if he could lure the tarot spider into the water, it would not be familiar with the water. Heath would be able to gain the upper hand. Then, with the advantage of fighting in the water, it would be much easier to defeat it. Unfortunately, the tarot spider's reaction did not allow him to get what he wanted. Although it was extremely angry at Heath, in the face of its instinctive sense of danger, this instinct still had the upper hand. Therefore, after hesitating for a long time on the shore, the tarot spider did not go down the lake to chase after Heath. Instead, its eyes gradually calmed down and it finally glared at Heath gloomily. Then, it retreated into the forest behind. Heath, who was in the lake, said in disappointment, "It's really a pity. I didn't expect this beast to be so smart." Nina rolled her eyes. "It's just a normal person, okay?" Heath said, "Is that so?" Nina said in a speechless manner, "Yes, all right. It's gone. Let's go ashore." Heath shook his head. "Let's wait a little longer. This thing isn't that easy to deal with. It might even ambush me by the shore." Nina said, "I'll fly up and take a look." Heath stopped her. "It has an advanced invisibility spell. You won't be able to see it." The tarot spider had a very advanced invisibility spell. It was able to completely blend itself with the surrounding environment. Even an advanced wizard might not be able to discover it, let alone a spirit like Nina. And it was precisely because of this that Heath didn't notice it in the forest earlier, which was why he accidentally injured it. Chapter 390. Splash. The clear sound of flowing water could be heard. In the middle of the quiet lake, Heath was standing on a piece of ice. He was holding the red demon greatsword and looking ahead, trying to identify if the tarot spider was lurking on the shore. This continued for a while. Nina, who was beside him, could not stand it anymore. She complained, "Hey, don't just stand there like a fool, okay? How is it? Do you see anything? That big guy is no longer here, right?" Heath frowned. "I'm not sure about that either." The tarot spider's concealment ability was very strong. It was similar to a chameleon's invisibility, and could completely blend into the surrounding environment. Once it entered the invisibility state, even advanced level wizards could hardly detect it. Heath was only an intermediate level wizard at the moment, and was still quite a distance away from an advanced level wizard. With his current spiritual perception ability, it was basically impossible for him to identify if the tarot spider had entered the invisibility state. Nina asked, "What should we do now? Just stand here and do nothing? We can't possibly stay on the surface of this lake for the rest of our lives, right?" Heath turned his head and looked behind him. This lake was very spacious. It looked like it was at least 10 miles wide. It lay in the middle of the forest, splitting the entire forest in half. Behind it was another part of the forest. After thinking for a moment, Heath said, "Let's take a detour from the back." The tarot spider was a demonized creature that bore grudges. If he was not 100% certain that it had already left, Heath would not dare to go ashore. After all, if he were to be ambushed, it would really be a disaster. In terms of strength, the tarot spider was one level higher than him. If he was ambushed, even with Heath's ability, he could not guarantee that he would be able to escape unscathed. It was better to be careful when facing such a huge creature. Anyway, the detour would only take him a few dozen miles at most. With his current speed, it would only take him a few hours. There would be no trouble at all. Nina complained, seriously, being chased by a giant spider for a few streets, you're really in a sorry state. Heath nodded. Yeah, this time it's really embarrassing. Pausing for a moment, he spun his great sword and swung it twice in the air. Then, a cold light flashed in his eyes. But today, I just happened to see my own shortcomings. It's not too late to look for this thing to settle the score when I'm stronger. Tarot spiders bore grudges. How could Heath not bear one? After being chased by such a beast for a few streets, it had been a long time since he looked so ugly. In addition to the abundant extraction attributes of an advanced level demonized creature and the massive amount of resources on its body, Heath would definitely not let go of this living treasure. It was just that his current strength was not enough, and he needed to lie low for a while. Pausing for a moment, Heath put away the red demon greatsword and said, "All right, let's go." As he spoke, he opened his spatial pocket and took out the mermaid sea gills from his pocket to paste them on himself. Actually, after advancing to an intermediate wizard, there were some spells that could allow a wizard to stay in the water and breathe for a long period of time. However, these spells consumed too much magic power. After all, the mermaid sea gills were wizard tools, and what was consumed was not the wizard's own magic power, but magic stones. Thus, Heath was still used to using the mermaid sea gills instead of his own magic power. After all, for a wizard, magic power could be said to be the foundation of a wizard's life. Under the premise of not using magic power, any wizard would try their best. Instead, they would use wizard tools, scrolls, potions, and other things. Splash! With a clear sound, water splashed on the surface of the water. Heath quickly jumped into the water and disappeared. After he left, a huge shadow suddenly appeared on the empty bank of the river. The shadow slowly became clear, and soon, the true appearance of the shadow was revealed. It was the tarot spider that had fought Heath and chased after him. Yes, Heath's judgment was not wrong. The tarot spider had indeed not left. As the king of this generation of the forest, the tarot spider had not been its opponent for a long time. In this forest, as long as it took a fancy to something, anything would be sent into its mouth. But today, it was provoked by a human. What made the tarot spider even angrier was that after chasing this human for a long time, it actually did not kill him, but let him escape instead. This was something the tarot spider could not tolerate. It was the king of this forest. As the king of this forest, it had the right to rule over everything in this forest. Now, there were people who disobeyed it without paying the price. That was something it could not accept. However, the tarot spider was naturally afraid of the water. It could not move freely in the water. Therefore, when it faced Heath who had jumped into the lake, it could not continue to chase after it. Instead, it could only watch from the shore. Therefore, in the end, when it confirmed that there would not be any results if it continued to chase after it, it decisively entered into a hidden state. It hid itself and stood guard by the shore, waiting for Heath to return to the shore. This was the experience it had accumulated over the years of hunting. Many creatures had once hidden in the lake to avoid it, but after all, they were all land-based creatures, so they could not stay in the water for long. The creatures that rushed in would usually return to the shore after a period of time. The tarot spider, who was certain of this, often pretended to leave when the creatures were lurking on the surface of the water, but in reality, it entered the stealth state and hid on the shore, waiting for the creatures to fall into their trap. It had used this trick more than once or twice to hunt its prey. However, to its surprise, the prey today did not return to the shore after seeing it leave, like other prey. Instead, it jumped into the water and disappeared. The tarot spider's limited intelligence could not understand why a land creature like a human would jump into the lake and disappear. It was only a hunter who was furious at the disappearance of its prey. All of a sudden, it opened its mouth wide and shot beams of light into the lake. These were beams of light formed by compressing high elemental particles. When the beams of light hit the surface of the water, boom! Boom! The sounds of explosions rang out continuously. Huge waves were created on the surface of the water. Obviously, the tarot spider, which could not catch up to Heath, could only use this method to vent its unhappiness. At the same time, it was also trying to see if it could blow Heath out of the water. Of course, this idea was destined to be futile. This was because Heath had already dived out for several miles with the help of the mermaid sea gills. The tarot spider's attack range was simply not that far. Moreover, its beam rays were only a mixture of high elemental density. The energy output method was very simple. Based on this level, it was impossible for it to cause much of an impact in a place that was too deep in the water. Heath, who had escaped, quickly sensed a very strong elemental fluctuation coming from behind. After using his spiritual power to sense and roughly reach a safe distance, he lurked out of the water. He looked at the tarot spider that was bombarding the shore. He could not help but open his mouth. Fortunately, I ran fast. This was his only thought at this moment. Previously, he thought that if he went all out, he would have an 80–90% chance of taking down the big spider. However, after seeing the tarot spider's attack at this moment, Heath felt that his chance of winning was only 50–60%. These attacks of the tarot spider were not the product of high elemental concentration. One had to know that such intense elemental bombardment required an immeasurable amount of magic power. Heath himself would at most lose his power after 2 or 3 attacks. However, this tarot spider did not even take a breather after such a long bombardment. This magic power reserve was truly terrifying. Nina, who was beside him, was also frightened. She shrunk her neck and said, "God, what terrifying mana reserves! Just how much mana does this guy have?" Heath was also speechless and said, "Who knows?" After bombarding for a full few minutes, the tarot spider finally stopped attacking. At this time, it seemed to be a little tired, and its eyes became a little dispirited. Seeing this scene, Nina's eyes lit up. She hurriedly shouted to Heath, "Hey, look at that guy, it stopped, and it seems to be very dispirited. What's wrong with it? Could it have used up all its magic power in the previous magic bombardment?" Nina had already noticed this detail, so how could Heath not see it? For a moment, Heath's heart suddenly beat faster, and one of his hands could not help but reach for the dimensional pocket containing the red demon greatsword. One had to know that the tarot spider was a demonized creature, and magic power was the true strength of a demonized creature. Without the help of magic, the power of a demonized creature would be greatly reduced. Although the tarot spider in front of him had an extremely strong body, what really gave Heath a headache was its powerful magic. Without the support of these magic spells, Heath was absolutely confident that he could defeat it. And now, this guy actually used up all its magic power because of venting. If that was really the case. Nina's voice was a little shaky as she asked, "Heath, what are you thinking about?" Heath said, "I think you should have guessed it." Nina said, "That's a crazy decision. In this situation, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to eliminate the tarot spider. To kill an advanced-level demonized creature with the strength of an intermediate-level wizard, just thinking about it made people excited. So should he go? The more he thought about it, the more excited Heath became. One of his hands had even opened the space pocket and grabbed the red demon greatsword in the pocket. As long as he made a decision, he could jump out of the water and launch an attack on the tarot spider at any time. However, just as Heath was about to make a decision, a layer of light suddenly flashed on the tarot spider's back. There was a layer of complicated patterns on the tarot spider's large buttocks. It looked like some kind of sticker tattoo. At this time, these patterns all lit up and released a layer of dazzling light. Along with this layer of light, a strong elemental fluctuation suddenly swept over from all directions. A visible elemental storm was set up in the air. It looked really terrifying. What was even more terrifying was that Heath was surprised to find that the elemental storm was spreading through the tarot spider's body at an exaggerated speed. The tarot spider's depleted magic power was also recovering rapidly during this process. In just a short span of 10 breaths, the tarot spider's dissipated magic power was completely replenished. The tarot spider's spiritual power, which had been somewhat dispirited a moment ago, suddenly became full again. Heath was speechless. Damn, no way. This thing actually has a talent for magic power recovery. Isn't it too shameless? In the book, Heath had read that some high-level demonized creatures had some unique innate attributes. They were able to interrupt other people's magic, restore their own magic power, and other strange and abnormal abilities. And this tarot spider in front of him seemed to have this innate ability that could allow it to quickly recover its magic power. Nina shrank her neck. Fortunately, you didn't act on impulse just now. Heath said indifferently, "What are you afraid of? If you go up and find that you can't beat it, you can just shrink back." He did not have complete confidence in defeating the Taro spider at the moment, but it was unlikely that the Taro spider would be able to kill him. After all, with his current strength, even if he were to face it head-on, he would be able to block the Taro spider's attacks. Nina was shocked. "Don't tell me you still want to rush up and fight with it." Heath rolled his eyes. "It's not like I'm crazy. If it had used up all its magic power just now, I could still try to go up and take advantage of it. But in this situation, if I were to rush up now, it would be asking for trouble." As he said that, he looked at the Taro spider on the shore again, and his eyes could not help but show a greedy look. Taro spider. It looks like a good research subject. Magic power recovery was a talent that countless wizards dreamed of. If he could extract this talent from this monster, Heath's strength would definitely increase by a lot. "Forget it, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. I'll let it live for 2 more days." Shaking his head, Heath forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart. No matter how greedy he was for this Taro spider, he knew that now was not the time. With his current ability, if he forcefully went up, he might not be able to win. Anyway, there was still plenty of time in this forest. It was not too late to find this thing and settle the score after thinking about it carefully. "Let's go." With this thought in mind, Heath finally drove the last bit of greed in his heart out of his head. He turned his head away from the Taro spider by the shore. With a plop, he plunged into the deep water ahead. Soon, he disappeared into the lake. Chapter 391. After diving into the lake, Heath quickly swam to the other side of the lake. The Taro spider had very strong tracking ability. If it was still on the surface of the water, it might be able to sniff and track Heath. However, after diving into the lake, there was no such possibility. The water element had a very strong restraining effect on the Taro spider. This restraining effect was all-encompassing, including its tracking ability. Once Heath dived into the lake, the Taro spider would no longer be able to locate him. Huff huff. Huff huff. In the lake, the sound of breathing that sounded like a bellow was heard. With the help of the mermaid sea gills, Heath could easily maintain his normal breathing underwater. However, this breathing was completely different from breathing on the ground. Just by listening to this breathing, one could tell that this breathing was much heavier. This was because the mermaid sea gills worked like an ordinary parotid gland. It absorbed a large amount of the surrounding water. Oxygen was filtered from the water and supplied to Heath's respiratory system so that Heath could breathe under the water. It took a lot of effort to extract a large amount of water each time, and it also consumed a lot of energy to filter the water. Therefore, when he breathed, it would make a sound like a bellow. If he relied solely on his own strength to urge the mermaid sea gills to filter the water, even a grand knight like Heath would not be able to use the mermaid sea gills for too long. At most, he would be out of strength after half an hour. The main reason why Heath could breathe freely underwater was that there was a separate magic array on the mermaid sea gills. The function of this separate magic array was to draw magic power from the magic stone to supply the mermaid sea gills. It was because of this separate magic array that Heath was able to use the mermaid sea gills freely. As he swam forward, he could not help but observe the scenery around him. It was different from the situation in the sea. The sea was very clear. The fish, seaweed, and even the sunlight that shot into the sea could be seen clearly. It was like a transparent glass bottle. The quality of the water in this kind of freshwater lake was much more turbid. The surface of the water, where the bottom could be seen, was covered with a layer of sand. The entire surface of the water looked a little dark and gloomy. It was not that bright. It was as if there was a layer of fog in it. However, this was also normal. The sea was, after all, an endless and vast sea. No matter what fell in, it would quickly be swallowed by the powerful volume of the sea itself. The volume of the lake itself was relatively small. Its swallowing ability was limited. A lot of sand that could not be swallowed easily drifted in the water, causing the water quality to be muddy. In addition, the ecological environment in the lake was not as good as that in the sea. In the sea, there were groups of fish, hundreds and thousands of them. Even the magnificent scene of tens of thousands of aquatic creatures gathering together was definitely not seen here. The ecological environment in the lake was really too simple compared to the sea. Heath had been observing his surroundings along the way, but he did not see many fish, shrimp, crabs, and other aquatic creatures. Occasionally, he would see some of them walking alone. The largest school of fish that Heath had seen was only about 100 or so. Compared to the sea, it was really not large at all. However, there was an additional scenery that could not be seen in the sea. The sea was salt water after all. There were many freshwater creatures that could not be seen in that place, such as frogs. When he swam to the other side, Heath saw a few frogs paddling forward in the water. They were surrounded by a dozen tadpoles. It was as if the tadpoles were looking for their mother. Not far away, there was a lotus leaf. The frogs swam all the way to the lotus leaf and jumped onto it. The remaining tadpoles surrounded the lotus leaf and refused to leave. It looked very interesting. In addition, there were freshwater shrimp and freshwater fish. There were many aquatic creatures that could not be seen in the sea. There were also some demonized creatures, such as a fish that could spit out ice swords. This was a water-type demonized creature called an ice carp. It was a freshwater fish that lived in lakes, streams, and inland rivers in the forest. Although it did not look very eye-catching, its strength was not ordinary. It had the strength of an intermediate-level apprentice and was very good at using ice element magic. Every once in a while, it would regularly release ice element energy. During the period when it released energy, wherever it swam, it would be frozen, forming ice lumps that floated to the surface of the water. Looking from the outside, it was as if after the fish swam through the water, when an ice road suddenly appeared under the water. It looked very magical, and because of this fish was also named Ice Road Fish by some ignorant humans. Some humans even thought that they were descendants of the god of ice, and used them as a form of worship. Ah, Heath, look, it's an ice carp. I really didn't expect that there would be such a thing here. Seeing the ice carp, Nina was pleasantly surprised. She pointed to the front and shouted at Heath. The ice carp had great medicinal value to wizards. The parotid glands on their bodies could be used to make many precious potions. Because of this, the ice carp was the target of wizards everywhere. Many wizards visited lakes around the world to catch this kind of ice carp, and even during a certain period of time. In the wild forest, whenever wizards saw lakes or streams, they would specially cast magic to dive down to see if there were ice carp. For this reason, a large number of wizard tools that were specially used to catch ice carps appeared. However, because of the wanton hunting by wizards back then, ice carps were becoming increasingly rare. The rarer the item, the more expensive it was. In the past, the price of an ice carp was not cheap. Now, with the sudden decline in the number of ice carps, the price of the ice carps became even higher. An inch-long ice carp would cost at least 100,000 magic stones in the wizard market, which showed how precious this material was. Nina quickly shouted to Heath, "Quick, Heath, catch it!" Heath said without hesitation, "You don't have to remind me." It did not matter to him whether it was worth magic stones or not. The key was that Heath had never extracted an ice carp before. Now that there was such a rare opportunity, he could not miss it. I wonder how many attribute bonuses this thing can give me. As he thought curiously, Heath's body exerted force and immediately shot out like an arrow towards the ice carp in front of him. After practicing repeatedly by the sea during this period of time, Heath had already mastered the skills of underwater movement. The speed of his swimming was naturally needless to say. It was no different from the sword he shot out. Just as he was about to reach the ice carp seemed to have sensed something. With a swing of its tail, it immediately flew out. Before Heath could pounce on it, it had already thrown Heath far away. "Ah, little thing, you're running pretty fast." After missing the target, Heath was not in a hurry. He mobilized his strength again and continued to chase after the ice carp in front of him. For a moment, the man and the fish began to chase each other in the lake. The ice carp swam in front while Heath followed closely behind. Originally, Heath thought that taking down the small fish would be a piece of cake, but this chase greatly exceeded his expectations. Although the ice carp was not a powerful demonized creature, its swimming speed in the water was surprisingly fast. It was like a gust of wind blowing in the water, exploding before the eyes and disappearing. This made Heath miss several times. Of course, if Heath used magic, the little thing would not be able to escape from his palm. As long as the wizard's force field was activated, Heath would be able to control the force field within 100 meters. Catching the little fish was a piece of cake. However, Heath did not choose to do that. After all, he was not in a hurry to go ashore. It was interesting to be able to play with the little fish underwater. It was just like how nobles like to go out and hunt. They mostly enjoyed the fun of hunting, not the prey itself. Heath was also enjoying this hunt. Whoosh! 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 All kinds of crisp sounds were heard in the water. Heath and the ice carp scuttled quickly in the water. After chasing for more than 10 minutes, the ice carp gradually slowed down. After all, it was only a small fish. No matter how powerful it was, its stamina was limited, especially when it was dodging at high speed just now, which was the most exhausting. Heath and the ice carp were on par in speed. Previously, Heath had been hanging not far behind the tail of the ice carp. Now that the speed of the ice carp had slowed down, he immediately chased after it. Not long after, the curtain of the chase was also drawn. Grabbing the small ice carp in his hand, Heath grinned. "Run? Aren't you running pretty fast?" The ice carp opened its mouth and immediately spat out an ice arrow. This arrow came very suddenly, and it was aimed directly at Heath's face. If it was any other wizard, they might really suffer a loss here. But to Heath, that was just a childish attack. Just as the ice arrow was about to hit him, a silver mimicry shield quietly appeared and immediately covered his face, as if he was wearing a silver mask on his face. Crack! The ice arrow hit the mimicry shield and exploded into pieces. "Good guy, you still dare to sneak attack me?" Heath, who had been filled with killing intent for a long time, did not give the monster the chance to attack him again. He reached out and pinched the central nerve on the ice carp's forehead and exerted a little strength. Immediately, a crack was heard. The central nerve of the ice carp was completely destroyed by him. Then, Heath silently chanted in his heart, "Extract." Beep, successful extraction. Spiritual power plus 0.2. Beep, extraction successful. Agility plus 0.3. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained talent, extreme swimming, dot. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained life sequence, ice carp, dot. Beep, extraction successful. This little carp did not disappoint Heath. As soon as he finished speaking, a series of system notifications rang in his ears, then he felt a huge amount of pure energy and all kinds of knowledge pouring into his spiritual sea and mind. Heath closed his eyes to feel it, but was surprised. "Oh, no wonder this thing can swim so fast. The secret is here." Extreme swimming was a talent attribute that he had just extracted from this ice carp. This talent clearly recorded the reason why the ice carp could swim fast, and now this talent belonged to Heath. Of course, this talent originally belonged to the ice carp, and it was completely compatible with the ice carp's body. If Heath's body was forced to use this talent, it would be impossible. For example, a dog could have an extremely strong sense of smell, which was determined by its physiological structure. No matter how much humans or other creatures imitated the behavior of dogs, they would not be able to obtain a dog's outstanding sense of smell talent. However, it was different for wizards. As long as a wizard could grasp the detailed composition of the other party's talent, they could completely reproduce the other party's talent. There were two ways to reproduce it. One was to change oneself. For example, using a transformation spell to transform oneself into an ice carp, thus giving oneself the physiological structure of an ice carp. Then, one could naturally use the ice carp's talent. Another way was to modify one's body, which was the same as the previous method, which was to change one's physiological structure. One could have the physiological structure of the ice carp so that one could use the talents of the ice carp. Another way was to modify the talents of the ice carp so that one could use them. This method was equivalent to using the talent of the ice carp as a blueprint to create a spell with this effect. Of course, this required a high level of knowledge and the ability to create spells. It was far from what an ordinary person could do. But this method was also one of the methods that wizards often used. Wizards' magic mostly came from simulating the abilities of various creatures in nature. Many spells were also created by simulating the natural talents of strange creatures in nature. Simulating the abilities of creatures in nature was a mainstream method, but it was also the most difficult one. The most difficult part was to figure out the innate structure of these creatures. Although the external performance of a creature's innate talent was easily known, its internal innate structure was very hidden. It was not easy for people to see it. If a wizard wanted to understand the specific structure of a creature's talent, they would need to carry out a lot of experiments, conjectures, and research. Only then would they be able to excavate the talent structure of the creature step by step. However, it was easy for Heath to understand the talent structure because when he extracted the creature's talent, the complete talent structure had also been extracted. Chapter 392. After extracting the ice carp's attributes, Heath casually threw the ice carp into his dimensional pocket. Since he had the opportunity to obtain such a precious material, he naturally had to bring it back. Whether it was for his own use or to exchange it for magic stones at the market, it was a considerable income. Following that, Heath continued to search the surroundings. Ice carp were social fish that usually appeared in groups. Since he had found an ice carp here, there should be more ice carp in the surroundings. As expected, after searching for a while, Heath found a school of ice carp a few hundred meters away. There were about 10 of them. The crowd gathered in this patch of water grass was wandering aimlessly. After learning from the previous experience, Heath did not rush over to disturb them. Instead, he used a shape-shifting spell to transform himself into the form of an ice carp. Wizards could freely transform into the form of a creature after learning about its life sequence. With the help of the powerful extraction function of the system, he had completely extracted the life form of an ice carp. Naturally, he could easily transform. Splash! The clear sound of flowing water rang out. Heath swayed his fishtail and slowly swam towards the school of fish in front of him. The shape-shifting spell changed the body in all directions, including his appearance, aura, smell, and even spiritual fluctuations. Once he turned into an ice carp, he would truly become this creature. The ice carp's kind would naturally not be able to detect that he was an imposter. However, perhaps his actions were a little strange when he swam over, which caused some ice carp to be curious. However, before the ice carp could figure out what was going on with this newcomer, Heath, who had entered the school of fish, instantly released the shape-shifting spell and released the wizard's force field at the same time as his body recovered. An invisible wizard's force field immediately spread out in the surroundings. All the ice carp in this force field were controlled by Heath's force field, and all of them fell into this invisible net without exception. Some ice carp, who had sensed that something was wrong, were driven by their will to survive and constantly urged their magic power in an attempt to struggle. However, to them, whose spiritual power was only at the level of an apprentice, in front of this intermediate wizard, the difference between them was too big. There was not even the slightest ripple. 1, 2, 3, 16, 17, 18. Haha, 18 of them. There's really a lot of them. After catching all these ice carp, Heath did a quick count. The number of ice carp here was really beyond his expectations. There were a total of 18 of them, and one had to know. The price of an ice carp was at least 100,000 magic stones. The profit of 2 million magic stones from the 18 ice carp here would not be small. Although I was chased all the way by that damn spider, I did not lose out on this trip. But then again, why are there ice carp here? Thinking of this, Heath could not help but look around in confusion. Ice carp were very rare creatures. They usually only lived in places with dense ice elements. Most of them could only be seen in the ice lakes and ice rivers around the ice plains. This was clearly a lush forest, and the surroundings were filled with the fragrance of birds, flowers, and a pleasant climate. There was not the slightest feeling of ice element gathering, and even the lake water was not cold at all. It was indeed a little strange for the ice carp to appear in such a place. Could there be something here? Thinking of this, Heath's eyes couldn't help but light up. A place like a lake wasn't directly exposed to the outside world, so it was often possible to hide some unknown treasures. For example, some high-grade materials that only grew at the bottom of the lake. There were also some wizards who liked to hide things in the lake, because the lake itself was a natural place to hide treasures. In the wizard world, there were often some wizards who passed by the lake and accidentally felt the elemental fluctuations under the lake. After diving into the lake to search, they found all kinds of precious particles. Could it be that this is also the case here? The more he thought about it, the more Heath felt that it was possible. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why there were so many ice carp even though there were no ice elements here. This itself was somewhat inconceivable. Let me sense it. As he thought about it, he immediately closed his eyes to calm himself down and released his spiritual power to his surroundings. This was the simplest way to sense. If there were some abnormal spiritual power fluctuations in the surroundings, he could sense everything through this method. Heath's spiritual power turned into a large net and spread out in the surroundings. The densely packed spiritual tentacles were like countless fine threads. They extended into the surrounding lake water, water plants, microorganisms, and even every cell and every element. After these spiritual tentacles cut into these substances, they quickly returned the information they found in the substances back to Heath's spiritual sea. Then, the surrounding conditions were all integrated into Heath's mind. He had completed his perception. This elemental fluctuation seems to really have something. After sensing for a while, Heath's expression changed. This was because he found an unusual elemental fluctuation. Elements were originally substances with high stability. Generally, the elemental structure of an area was very stable. The frequency of the fluctuation and the form of the fluctuation was very fixed. A lake like this should have a stable form of the fluctuation, with the water element as the main element. However, during his perception just now, Heath unexpectedly found an element fluctuation that did not belong to a lake. Although it was very weak, this kind of elemental fluctuation should indeed not appear in a place like a lake. In other words, there must be other things that could bring about the elemental fluctuation here. It could be wizard tools, other demonized creatures, or even some items that were closely related to magic, etc. There are too few clues. I need to look further. With this discovery, Heath was immediately motivated. He immediately carefully observed the elemental fluctuations while looking for the direction of the elemental fluctuations according to the weak reaction from the fluctuations. This elemental fluctuation was very weak. It took Heath a long time to finally determine the direction of the fluctuations. Found it. Then, he did not delay. After locking on the direction of the fluctuation, he immediately swam in that direction. It was in the middle of the lake in front of him. It seemed that something was faintly coming in that direction. The lake here seemed to have become a depression. The higher the terrain was, the lower it was in the middle. When he reached the middle, he could not see the riverbed at all. Heath continued to swim down the lake. According to the touch of his spiritual power, this spiritual fluctuation should have come from below. Oh my God, isn't this lake too deep? The depth of the lake was far beyond Heath's expectations. After swimming down for hundreds of meters, he still could not see the bottom of the lake. Heath had to stop for a while, because with his current body, he could no longer continue swimming down. The water pressure brought by hundreds of meters of lake water was beyond imagination. Even if Heath had used mermaid sea gills, it could not change the structure of his human body. This kind of body structure was already the limit at this point. Thus, Heath took out his usual spell, the shape-shifting spell, and the shape was none other than the ice carp just now. After transforming into an ice carp, the problem of water pressure no longer existed. He swayed his tail and slowly swam down the lake. Although his body had become smaller, the speed of the ice carp was extremely fast. It was only stronger than Heath himself. After swimming for nearly 1,000 meters, he finally reached the bottom of the lake. Compared to the seawater, the ecological environment at the bottom of the lake was much simpler. The bottom of the lake was just a flat piece of sand. On the surface of the sand, there were some aquatic plants, algae, and other plants that were common in the water. There were some small rocks scattered around, and small shrimps, crabs, and fish could be seen walking around. Other than that, there was nothing else except for the bare ground. At a glance, it looked like a wasteland with nothing at all. Where could it be? From the clues that came from the spiritual sense, it should be this location. However, after arriving here, the spiritual sense had become very scattered. For a moment, Heath could not determine the exact location. He could only roughly determine that it was in this area. There was no other way. He could only search the place bit by bit. At the same time, he withdrew the spiritual energy that had spread out and concentrated it around 100 meters away from him. Although with his current strength, if he released his spiritual sense at full force, it could be spread out to a distance of thousands of meters. However, the more spiritual sense was spread out, the less accurate it was. If he was looking for an object or creature that had a clear purpose of knowing the elemental fluctuations in a large area, of course, it was better to spread his spiritual energy as wide as possible. However, if they were looking for an object that was uncertain and even had a weak spiritual sense, then it would definitely be better to concentrate their spiritual power to obtain some information. However, after several times of this, the search still did not go smoothly. Even though Heath had already focused his spiritual sense, he still could not find any clues. The information that he received from his spiritual sense was basically no different from before. It was still very weak. It was as if something had exploded here into countless pieces or even directly disintegrated into countless elements and spread around. After searching for a long time without any results, Heath called Nina out again and asked her to help him look for it. However, even if they searched for it, they still could not find any results. The spiritual sense was still the same without any changes. Could it be that something really exploded here, disintegrated, and broke down into countless elements that spread to this area? Heath could not help but become suspicious for a moment. Nina, who had searched around once, returned to Heath's side at this time. Hey, Heath, we've searched over there and found nothing. Are you really sure that there's something related to magic here? There's no elemental fluctuations at all, okay. Then, maybe my perception is wrong. After searching for so long without finding anything, Heath began to doubt. Nina pouted. Seriously, why are you spending so much effort on something that you are not sure about? If you have the strength, you might as well leave this place as soon as possible. Alright, stop wasting time. There's no point in staying at the bottom of this dark lake. Let's get out of here. Heath hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still nodded. It was probably just his own wishful thinking. Thinking about it, it made sense. Although wizards did have the habit of throwing things into the lake, that was only a minority. It was even more impossible for any random lake in the deep mountains to have treasures left behind by other wizards. If that was the case, then the wizards would have already plundered all the lakes in the wizard world long ago. He nodded and said, "All right, let's go." With that, he waved his fish tail and swam to the top of the lake, ready to leave this area. However, before he could swim far, suddenly, there was a flash of light at the bottom of the lake, as if something was flashing under it. One had to know that this was a place that was more than 1,000 meters below. The sunlight above could not reach such a deep distance. This area was basically dark. Although it was not completely dark, at least, it was as dark as a period of time not long after the sun set. In such an environment, even if the light that suddenly lit up was not that strong, it was definitely very obvious. In addition, there was no distraction in the surroundings. Heath immediately noticed this light. Heath, is there something flashing over there? Not only Heath, Nina, who was beside him, also noticed the light. The female spirit, who was about to return to her ring, suddenly stopped. I'll go take a look. She moved faster than Heath, and with a whoosh, she flew out. In the sea, a spirit like Nina did not need to consider factors like the lake water and resistance. Her speed was much faster than Heath's. Heath immediately followed her and arrived here half a beat later. This place was also a flat and open space, and there were some aquatic plants growing in the open space. At this time, Nina was among a group of aquatic plants. She seemed to have taken something out of the aquatic plants. Heath landed in the open space and asked Nina, "How is it? Did you find something?" Nina nodded. "You really guessed it. There is indeed something at the bottom of the lake. Look, what is this thing?" As she spoke, she reached out her hand to Heath and spread it in front of him. After she spread her hand, an object was immediately revealed inside. It was a triangular iron plate. There was also a complicated pattern carved on it. Chapter 393. Nina handed over a piece of metal. It looked like a piece of iron. The color was grayish-brown and it was shaped like a triangle. It looked like a metal part that had been broken down from some kind of object. There were even some broken marks at the corners. It was obvious that it had been broken down from something. Nina handed the piece of metal to Heath and said, "You really guessed it. There is indeed something under here. Look, what is this?" Heath took it over and began to think about the origin of this thing. The metal piece could sense elemental fluctuations, and this elemental fluctuation was exactly the same as the elemental fluctuations he had detected in the water. It was obvious that the elemental fluctuations in the water came from this thing. Nina, who was beside him, couldn't wait to ask, Hey, quick, tell me, what is this treasure?" Heath touched his chin and said, "If I'm not wrong, this metal should be grey magic iron. This kind of metal has excellent magic conduction properties and is usually used to make wizard tools. The elemental fluctuations on this metal fragment should be a wizard tool, so I think this thing should have been a wizard tool in the past, but for some reason, this wizard tool has been broken, and now only this little thing is left." Nina said, "Not bad. You can roughly analyze it from this little thing. A magic madman is indeed a magic madman. It seems that you spend all your time on books for a reason. A well-read wizard is a wizard like you, right?" Heath ignored Nina and completely focused on the metal plate. After all, he had felt the elemental fluctuations of this metal plate from a very far distance just now. To be able to release elemental fluctuations over such a long distance, just this alone was enough to prove that this thing was definitely not simple. What could it be? A high-level wizard tool? A rule wizard tool? Or, a holy item? Heath really wanted to figure this out, but unfortunately, the damage to this wizard tool was too severe, and there were only so few fragments left. It was impossible to understand the complete wizard tool from these fragments alone. Can I extract some clues? Heath suddenly remembered that he could use the system to try. If the system really extracted something from it, then he would be able to deduce more clues from this little clue. From this, he could slowly deduce the true identity and origin of this wizard tool. With this in mind, he immediately chanted in his heart, "Extract." Beep, extraction failed. This substance cannot be extracted. Unfortunately, Heath did not get his wish. After he finished speaking, he heard the system reply. Thinking about it, all the items that the system could extract must be complete or close to complete, and since this piece of metal had been damaged to such a state, the system could not do anything about it. Unable to find any help from the system, Heath could only continue to focus his attention on this piece of metal. After careful observation, he finally made another discovery. The surface of this piece of metal seemed to be covered with a complicated pattern. The pattern covered the surface of the entire piece of metal. All kinds of heraldry and patterns in the wizard world were child's play to Heath. Over the years, he had accumulated countless heraldry, and in heraldry, he was definitely a master figure. As long as it was heraldry used in this world, it was impossible for him not to recognize it, and the pattern in front of him was no exception. This pattern is golden leaf flower. After careful observation, Heath found that this pattern seemed to be an emblem called the golden leaf flower. It was a strange flower that grew in the underground world, and its stamen itself was nothing strange, but the strange thing was that its leaves were golden, as if they were made of gold, hence the name. Nina asked, "Why? Did you find anything?" Heath nodded and said, "If I'm not mistaken, the pattern on this emblem should be the golden leaf flower." "Yes, although it's already badly damaged, I'm sure it's not wrong. This is the pattern of the golden leaf flower." Nina was speechless. "What? Just this little discovery? It doesn't seem to be of any use." Heath shook his head. "How could it not be of any use? You have to know that the various wizard organizations in the wizard world have strict rules regarding the patterns, heraldry, and the meaning of each pattern. As long as this is a wizard organization under the Alliance, you can deduce the identity of the other party from the patterns." Nina's eyes lit up. "Then you know what this thing is?" Heath shook his head. "Unfortunately, I don't." Nina. Her eyebrows shot up. "Hey, are you kidding me? Isn't it pointless to talk about it?" Heath said, "I can't deduce what this thing is, but I know that the wizard organization that uses this emblem is a wizard organization called the Volcano Tower. This wizard organization is located near the Lost Volcano, and that is one of the entrances to the underground world." Nina's eyes lit up. "So, this thing should be related to the wizards of the Volcano Tower." Heath nodded. "If there isn't someone pretending to be an emblem, then this must be from the Volcano Tower, and..." According to what Heath knew, the wizards of the Volcano Tower seemed to be related to the underground gnomes tribe. To be exact, it was related to the wizard who sent the underground gnomes to this forest and settled down here. Nina asked, "And what?" Heath shook his head. "Nothing." "Well, that's it for now. In the future, if we meet a wizard of Volcano Tower, we can take the thing out and ask him, and we should be able to find out the origin of this thing." Nina was a girl who was overly curious. If she believed that this thing was related to the underground gnomes, she would definitely catch the underground gnomes and interrogate them about all kinds of messy things. This was something Heath did not want to see. Even if Heath really wanted to know something, he only intended to ask it in private. Nina clapped her mouth in boredom. All right, how boring. I thought I would get some treasure after wasting so much energy, but I didn't expect to get such a piece of junk. It's really disappointing." After a pause, she yawned and said, "Yawn. I'm sleepy. If there's nothing else, I'll go back to the ring to sleep. See you later." With a bang, Nina exploded into a cloud of smoke and quickly disappeared into the ring in Heath's hand. Meanwhile, on the spiritual link between Heath and Nina, Heath quickly sensed that Nina had entered a dormant state. Heath was speechless. She just woke up and then went to sleep. She shouldn't be called a ghost, she should be called the god of sleep. Hey, don't talk bad about me in secret. I only sleep to recover my spiritual energy, but that doesn't mean that my consciousness has fallen into a chaotic state. I'm always monitoring your every move. Nina's voice sounded in his spiritual sea. Heath said, then I really appreciate your concern. Nina giggled and said, you're welcome. After all, I'm your spirit pet. This is what I should do. Heath said, go to sleep. Nina said, okay, okay. I'm really going to sleep this time. Good night. After saying goodbye to Nina, Heath did not delay any longer. He wagged his tail and slowly swam to the surface of the lake. A distance of more than 1,000 meters was nothing to the speed of the ice carp. After a few scuttles in the water, Heath soon arrived at the surface of the lake. Splash! A clear sound of flowing water could be heard. A beautiful ice blue carp leaped up from the lake. The dirty water scattered colorful light under the mottled sunlight. When he returned to the lake, Heath immediately looked behind him. On the shore behind him, the previous bombardment of magic by the tarot spider had stopped. The entire forest returned to its previous silence. However, there were waves all over the shore. The entire shore of the lake had been completely destroyed. Looking at the ground that had been blasted into pieces and the trees that had completely disappeared, even after so long, Heath could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Even if he tried his best, he might not be able to do such terrifying damage. Previously, he had thought that if he tried his best, he would be able to fight the tarot spider 50-50 or even gain an advantage, but now, he felt that if he chose to fight the tarot spider head-on instead of running away, it was hard to say who would win. Before I become stronger, I should stay away from that thing. No, I should stay away from that forest. After thinking for a while, Heath made this decision silently. Although he was very interested in the material that the tarot spider, an advanced level demonized creature, could extract, even if Heath wanted to kill the tarot spider right now to extract it, it seemed to be an unrealistic idea at the moment. It was better to put it in his mind for the time being. With this in mind, Heath swam toward the opposite shore. In fact, according to his speculation, the tarot spider on the shore should not be hiding at this time. It had just used so much magic power. Even the tarot spider could not completely hide its aura. However, Heath still did not sense the tarot spider's aura from the shore. From this point alone, it could be confirmed that it had already gone far away. However, to be safe, Heath still did not choose to retreat. Instead, he continued to swim towards the other side of the lake according to the original plan. After all, speculations were speculations. Who knew if that thing had really retreated? If it were to launch a sneak attack, wouldn't he suffer a great loss? Heath did not stop all the way to the other side of the lake. However, even at this point, Heath still did not go ashore. Instead, he carefully swam around the river bank and opened his spiritual power net to carefully observe his surroundings. He confirmed that the tarot spider did not come over to ambush him. After all, the lake was not too big. There were only a few places that could land. Who knew if the tarot spider would run to the other side to wait for him after it failed to get him out from the other side after a series of bombardments? Originally, Heath did not really predict that the tarot spider would come to wait for him. He was just taking the chance to be safe. However, unexpectedly, after this search, he actually felt the aura left behind by the tarot spider on the shore. No way, there really is. Heath was shocked. The perseverance of this thing was really beyond his imagination. Although the tarot spider predicted that he might land from this side, it could not be completely sure. The scent left behind here was obviously from a long time ago. Apparently, the big guy had wandered around here for a while and left after finding nothing. What a vengeful little monster! While exclaiming in his heart, Heath returned to the shore. It was night, the Ashud tribe of little people. Sir Wizard, you're back. Sir Wizard, how is it? Did you find the materials you need today? Good evening, Sir Wizard. I'm so happy to see you. We've prepared a bonfire tonight. Can you come with us? It was already night when they returned to the underground gnomes tribe. During this period, they were in a peaceful period of absence from the nightmares. The tribe would not be attacked by the nightmares, so the underground gnomes seemed to be very relaxed. There was even a bonfire inside the tribe. They were singing and dancing around the bonfire. Although the nightmares were terrifying, they did not appear all the time. Especially every time the nightmares broke out and were defeated, it would go through a long cycle before the next attack. If the cycle was short, it would take a few months. At the longest, there would even be a few years where there were no nightmares. After greeting the underground gnomes who had come to greet him, Heath was ready to return to the laboratory. However, before he could return, he was stopped halfway by the underground gnomes. No matter what, they had to drag him to the bonfire banquet. During the battle with the nightmares, the underground gnomes were almost completely wiped out. It was not an exaggeration to say that the reason why they could still sing and dance here and eat barbecue around the bonfire was because of Heath's efforts. It was all the result of Heath's efforts to turn the tide. In the face of such a great achievement, Heath had long become the hero that the entire underground gnomes tribe worshipped. The original purpose of this bonfire banquet was to celebrate the victory that they had just won. In such a big celebration, Heath would definitely be the main character. How could he be absent? "Sir Wizard, please come. We've prepared barbecued meat, fresh elk, and fresh fruit for you. We just got them from the forest. Hero, our dinner is prepared for you." Heath opened his mouth. He was not interested in the dinner, but he could not resist the enthusiasm of the underground gnomes, so he finally agreed.